Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Aisling Murphy. Aisling Murphy, born in 1998, was the youngest of three siblings. Her family lived in Blue Ball, Ireland, a peaceful town about an hour's drive from Dublin. Aisling grew up in a loving environment, influenced by her father's passion for music, particularly the bagpipes and violin. Inspired by him, she began studying traditional Irish music. She joined a youth choir in school and later became part of an orchestra, performing folk music at various events across Ireland and Great Britain. She was talented, independent, and sociable, which allowed her to integrate well with her team and feel comfortable on stage. After graduating from school, Aisling quickly sought employment. She was determined to achieve complete independence from her parents, so she began searching for full-time job opportunities right after receiving her diploma. Despite her career ambitions, she continued to nurture her love for music. She often performed for her relatives during special family gatherings on weekends, which further strengthened their connections. Aisling wanted to create her own family someday, but first, she focused on establishing herself. She went to college and became a first-grade teacher at a school where she had previously studied. This moment in her life was very meaningful. The teachers and students appreciated Aisling for her energy, kindness, and creativity. Aisling was truly suited for this role due to her strong moral character. She made a smooth transition from being an excellent student to becoming a wonderful teacher. Aisling was friendly, well-mannered, sweet, and self-assured. During her first week of work, she taught music on weekends, showing her passion for her job and her enjoyment of working with children. At 28, she had been in a relationship with her boyfriend, Ryan, for over 6 years. They met when Aisling was just 15. Initially, their romance didn't last, and they broke up after a few months. However, they eventually reunited, realizing that they were too young when they first started dating as teenagers. Their feelings for each other reignited, and they fell deeply in love, often talking about their future, including marriage and children. They had planned a trip in 2 days, but unfortunately, it seemed their dreams would not come to fruition. Aisling finished her workday and planned to go for a run along the Grand Canal in Tullamore. This was a routine activity for her, as she enjoyed fitness and outdoor recreation. She loved walking or running in beautiful locations, so she often visited the canal when she could. The Grand Canal was a popular spot for runners, featuring a designated path for walking. It was usually busy, which made Aisling comfortable going there alone. After work, Aisling got ready for her run. She first went home to change her clothes and tell her mother about her schedule. Her mother reassured her daughter that she was old enough to take care of herself and that there was no danger in this. Aisling left, and that was the last time her mother saw her alive. About an hour after Aisling left home, 2 runners warming up along the Grand Canal called for help. They were running on one side of the canal and saw a man attacking a girl on the opposite bank. Since they didn't have mobile phones, they ran to the nearest payphone to report the incident. They informed the emergency dispatcher that they had witnessed a threatening man assaulting one of the female runners. The witnesses confirmed that the victim was still alive when the attacker dragged her into the bushes. She screamed and fought back, desperately trying to push him away, but she was clearly outmatched. The dispatchers sent police officers to the specified location. Upon arrival, the police and a witness found the body of a young woman at the canal. The young girl, who showed no signs of life, was found to have been severely beaten, as the caller had reported. She had been pulled off the paved road and into the bushes, where she suffered physical abuse. Her face and neck were covered in cuts, and her hair was matted with dried blood. Paramedics arrived and attempted to resuscitate her for 10 minutes, but they were unable to save her and confirmed her death. While the exact cause of death remained unclear, it was evident she had been beaten badly. The body of the murdered girl was sent for an autopsy, which revealed stab and cut wounds on her neck. A forensic expert identified 11 injuries, primarily on the right side of her neck, including a cut throat that rendered her unable to call for help. Signs of possible strangulation were also found. The victim was identified as Aisling Murphy. On her hands, there were deep cuts, likely sustained during a struggle. Keys were discovered near her body, and it was determined she had used them defensively, gripping them tightly in an effort to fight off her attacker. The weapon used in the attack did not inflict enough damage to prevent the criminal from continuing his assault. Aisling died from severe blood loss caused by multiple stab wounds to her neck, leading to her death within minutes. Near her body, police found sunglasses and a mobile phone in her jacket pocket. An abandoned bicycle was also found nearby, likely belonging to the attacker. The criminal had already fled the scene after harming his innocent victim. The brutality of the attack was shocking, especially since it occurred in broad daylight in a crowded area with witnesses. 2 runners who were in the vicinity witnessed the crime. They observed both the attack and the assailant. They provided vital information to the police. The first witness, Emma, reported that she was walking her dog by the Grand Canal when she noticed a girl jogging. She saw a man on a bright green bicycle closely following the jogger. Initially, Emma thought they might be running together because the cyclist stayed so close to the girl. She described the cyclist as looking like a migrant, not Irish. He had yellowish skin, a short haircut, and was wearing a black tracksuit with red logos. Later, Emma met another witness, Jenna, and together they witnessed the cyclist attack the girl. The attack appeared sudden and unprovoked. Jenna witnessed the attack and provided a detailed account. Her description matched that of another witness, who reported that the victim screamed, threatening the attacker, but then suddenly fell silent. This silence was caused by a wound to Aisling's neck that severely severed her vocal cords. Later, Jenna screamed loudly, threatening to call the police. Despite the threats, the attacker did not let go of the victim. Police found a green bicycle near the trail that belonged to the attacker. Meanwhile, police gathered more evidence and discovered that Aisling had been wearing a fitness tracker while running. The device recorded her body metrics, including speed, distance, and heart rate, helping to clarify the details surrounding her death. The data showed that Aisling started running at 2:51 p.m., and before that, GPS records showed she had parked her bike near the canal. After that, her pulse was around 100 beats per minute, indicating she was in an active phase. She maintained this heart rate until 15:21, during which she ran approximately 3 kilometers. However, after 15:21, her heart rate changed. The Aisling experienced erratic fluctuations, and GPS data showed she was standing still at that time. This was clearly when she was attacked, and by 15:31, her heart had stopped beating. The next step for the police was to review footage from surveillance cameras in the area. Police identified the locations of all recording devices, hoping to find video that would show the suspect, the victim, and the attack itself. Police checked surveillance cameras, focusing on the time frame between 12:25 and 16:05, and were able to identify a man who matched the witness description exactly. It appeared that he was moving randomly along the roads. They determined that this man had appeared long before Aisling's arrival and was using a bicycle identical to the one found at the crime scene. The prime suspect was wearing a black hoodless jacket and sweatpants with stripes down the side, and also had a red logo on his clothes, as Emma described. He had been following a woman in a dark burgundy jacket but was later spotted by her. He had been looking at the victim with interest, but for some unknown reason he quickly fell behind. In footage from another camera, the suspect stops at 1:53 p.m. He reaches into his pocket and pulls out an object. He is seen holding and twisting something in his hand, but the poor quality of the footage makes it difficult to determine what it is. Police suspect he pulled out a knife, which he then used to kill Aisling. A forensic expert concluded that Aisling was killed with a small serrated knife, as the wounds had jagged edges. The man was seen again on surveillance footage at around 2:55 p.m., just as Aisling began training on the trail. Police discovered that the suspect had been wandering around the area, apparently looking for victims, as he occasionally focused on different women. He followed these women at a distance but lost interest until he came across Aisling, whom he decided to attack. Unfortunately, the surveillance cameras did not capture high-quality images that could help identify the criminal. Hours after the attack, a suspect was arrested based on information from witnesses. The suspect, Griot Keegan, is a 39-year-old Romanian immigrant who has lived in Ireland for 23 years and has no criminal record. He matched the person seen on surveillance cameras and found near the scene of the attack. At the police station, he vehemently denied any involvement in the incident. While police were questioning him, police obtained a search warrant and thoroughly searched his house, but found no evidence of his guilt. Griot maintained that there had been a mistake. He provided an alibi that was verified. He had been in a store making a purchase, which was confirmed by his receipt and surveillance footage. After that, he was seen walking along the south bank of the canal while the murder occurred on the north bank. The suspect's fingerprints and DNA samples were collected to compare with skin particles found under the Aisling's nails and on the bicycle, but there was no match. This confirmed that he was not involved in the crime. He was cleared of all suspicions and released. However, for some time, he and his family received threats as local residents still viewed him as a murderer. He was temporarily provided with alternative housing, and the police issued a public statement clarifying that Griot was not connected to the crime. Only after this did the public stop harassing him. This case received wide publicity across the country. The local community was outraged by the attack on Aisling and called on the police to quickly identify and arrest the perpetrators responsible for the tragic death of a talented young woman in broad daylight. For days, police have been trying to piece together clues, and the situation has taken a surprising turn. On the evening following the attack, a 30-year-old man named Josef Puska was admitted to a hospital in Dublin with abdominal injuries. Josef was originally from a small village in Slovakia. He left school at 16 without finishing his education and spent most of his life working as a laborer in the Czech Republic. Although he faced challenges in his lifestyle and at school, Josef was not involved with bad influences, had no criminal record, and was generally seen as a positive individual. In 2015, he moved to Dublin, Ireland, where he and his wife planned to settle permanently. He continued his work as a builder, and during their time there, they welcomed 5 children. Everything seemed to be going well until he suffered a back injury at work. After his recovery, Josef found that he could not return to his previous activities. The back injury was more severe than he had anticipated, leading him to receive disability benefits. He spent a significant amount of time in the hospital, and afterward, he relied on state support. The financial situation was tight, so his wife had to work. Josef had limited proficiency in Irish and struggled with English, which made it difficult for him to communicate with medical staff. When he went to the hospital the day after Aisling's murder, he needed an interpreter for assistance. Thanks to the interpreter, Josef explained that he was in Blanchardstown the previous day, January 12th. He took a taxi there and noticed he was being followed as soon as he arrived, but he did not think much of it since it was daytime. Suddenly, the attackers assaulted him, stabbing him multiple times in the stomach before they ran away. He managed to get home, where he informed his family about the incident and called for an ambulance. Doctors discovered cuts on Josef's hands, signs of defensive wounds. He had multiple stab wounds in his abdomen and received painkillers before a 2-hour surgery. The surgery was completed around 10 o'clock. The doctors concluded that Yosef's injuries were from stab wounds inflicted by a small knife, but they were not life-threatening. He remained in the hospital for several days to recover. As part of their protocol, the doctors informed the police about the incident. Officers came to speak with Yosef, who was the victim of another attack. Police suspected that the same criminal who attacked Aisling might also be responsible for Yosef's injuries. During the conversation, Yosef's behavior became increasingly awkward and suspicious. He seemed confused, struggled to recall simple details, and appeared noticeably nervous. Police began to question whether this unemployed man could be connected to Aisling's murder. The next day, the police returned to the hospital to continue questioning and gather more details. This time, Yosef gave more specific answers. He explained that he had taken a taxi to the city to meet a woman he had met online. Yosef then revealed that he was married with 5 children but did not want his wife to know about his secret encounters. It was later discovered that he had registered on several dating websites and was regularly seeing different women. His wife remained unaware of his affair, as Yosef was very careful to keep it a secret. The police asked Yosef if he owned a bicycle. He replied that he had a green bicycle that he had used for a long time. However, when they inquired whether he had been riding it on the day of the murder, Yosef started to stutter and claimed that his bicycle had been stolen over 2 weeks ago. He had not reported the theft to the police, which raised suspicions. Yosef then appeared increasingly anxious, prompting police to leave his hospital room. The police also discovered that he had been near the canal around 6 p.m. that same day. They obtained a warrant to search his apartment, allowing them to collect his clothing and mobile phone for forensic analysis. They called Yosef to inform him of this. Sensing something was amiss, he directly asked the police, through an interpreter, if he was a suspect. The officers reassured him that they were merely trying to clarify the situation and needed to conduct an examination. This conversation occurred over the phone. After the police answered, the Yosef paused for a long moment. Then he turned to the translator and asked him to accurately relay his words to the police officer. Yosef admitted that he had killed the girl by the canal, but he insisted that it was unintentional and an accident. Later the Yosef addressed the police directly. He explained that he was riding his bicycle along a path when he encountered an unfamiliar girl. He had a knife in his hand and accidentally cut her in the neck after losing his balance. She became angry, which frightened Yosef, and he claimed he struck her in the stomach with an object that resembled a knife. He said he tried to remain calm, hoping the girl would settle down. However, she began screaming and threatening him even more, forcing Yosef to defend himself. He then attacked her, repeatedly stabbing her in the neck with his knife. She fought back desperately, but he was able to overpower her. The police were taken aback by his phone confession, finding the story hard to believe. It seemed implausible that Yosef could accidentally stab the victim in the neck before she attacked him. They questioned how Aisling could have had a knife. Yosef expressed fear of retaliation. He believed that if Aisling's friends and relatives learned of the incident, they might harm his children and wife. He asked the police to keep the names of his family members confidential. The police assured Yosef that he would not face prosecution as he would soon be arrested and put on trial. After being discharged from hospital, he was immediately arrested for murder. Afterward, the Yosef changed his story and refused to confess. Despite this, the prosecutor's office viewed him as the only person who could have harmed Aisling that day. They decided to seek the maximum punishment for the murderer. The initial trial date was set for June 2023, but there were several delays, and it wasn't until October 2023 that the prosecution presented the case to the jury. During the trial, prosecutors played surveillance footage showing an attacker who looked like Yosef cycling along a path near the canal for hours before targeting Aisling. His actions were typical of a predator looking for prey. Forensic experts found traces of DNA under Ashling's fingernails, suggesting she fought back and injured her attacker. DNA from tissue samples matched Joseph, and his fingerprints were found on a green bicycle. All witnesses who saw the attacker that day identified him as Joseph. New evidence emerged during the investigation, particularly from one of Josef's friends, a Slovakian bus driver. On the night of January 12, while working, he encountered Joseph, who had severe scratches on his stomach. Concerned, the driver offered Joseph a ride home. Joseph mentioned he had gotten into a fight but did not provide details about the incident. During the drive, the bus driver repeatedly questioned Joseph about what had happened, but Joseph avoided giving clear answers and kept holding his stomach, which was bleeding. The driver grew increasingly worried, suspecting that the injuries might be linked to the ethnic cleansing events happening at that time, as there were widespread expressions of hatred against other nationalities. To deflect his friend's questions, Joseph concocted a story about being attacked by a masked man, claiming he couldn't identify the attacker because he hadn't seen his face before and didn't know him. Joseph attempted to portray himself as a hero, claiming he had seen a masked stranger attacking a woman near the canal. Joseph claimed he was stabbed multiple times as he tried to approach the bleeding girl. He became frightened when he realized what had happened and then fled. Despite being suspected of murder, he began to insist that he was actually the savior, having been injured in a fight with the real attacker. However, this new account does not clarify how his DNA was found under Ashling's fingernails or his fingerprints on the green bike he left behind. Joseph's defense argued that his false confession about the attack on Ashling resulted from the painkillers he received in the hospital, which caused him to feel euphoric and led him to speak to himself. Joseph stated that he was under the influence of these drugs when the police began their interrogation. However, doctors who treated Joseph contradicted this claim. They stated that he only received a minimal dose of the medication, meaning it could not have significantly affected him by the time he made his confession. The prosecution highlighted that Joseph had changed his testimony multiple times, making his statements unreliable. However, this posed a challenge for the prosecution because Joseph had no history of violence, especially against women. There were no indications of aggression or cruelty in his behavior, and he had no connection to Ashling, raising questions about his motive for the attack. The prosecution argued that the incident was not a result of personal issues. The trial lasted 3 weeks, after which a jury of 12 members returned their verdict. They deliberated for 3 hours before finding Joseph Puska guilty of the murder of Ashling Murphy. As a result, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The circumstances surrounding Ashling's murder shocked the nation. Just days after the tragedy, protests were held across Ireland in support of the victim's family, and the case shocked the nation. During the investigation, police determined that Joseph had attacked Ashling without any apparent motive. He did not know her. He appeared to be a predator who had been searching for a victim for hours. Unfortunately, Ashling fell victim to a monster. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Melissa Caddick. Melissa Louise was born on April 21, 1971, to Barbara and Ted Grimley. Her father working for an insurance company and her mother working as a physiotherapist. Melissa's family was middle class and her parents were active in the Lions Club. Melissa was a quiet child who had difficulty studying but later developed an interest in fashion at an early age. After completing high school, she went on to study secretarial and business studies at Patrick's College in Sydney. Melissa initially worked as an administrator in the investment sector of the National Road Association. She had always been interested in finance. In 1992, after a stressful week, Melissa went out to unwind and have a drink. She ended up meeting a charming man at the bar, and they struck up a conversation. However, it became apparent that the man had ill intentions. He maxed out Melissa's credit cards and stole several valuable items from her home. When Melissa finally realized what had happened, she lost all her money. This experience taught her a big lesson: sharing financial information and putting trust in wrong people can have serious consequences. Unfortunately, Melissa would later apply this lesson to exploit others rather than protect them. In 1998, Melissa accepted an office administrator position at an investment bank's Sydney branch. Her responsibilities included managing large sums of money. Although Melissa had previously experienced the bitterness of being cheated out of money by her ex-boyfriend, but she proved that she was no different from him. 6 months into her role, it was discovered that Melissa had falsified the manager's signature to embezzle $22,000 from the company. When the corporate headquarters became aware of her misconduct, she was allowed to resign voluntarily to avoid police involvement. Furthermore, they did not ask Melissa to return the money she had embezzled, as they considered the amount too small to make a big deal out of it. After a rough breakup with her ex-boyfriend, Melissa decides to focus on rebuilding her personal life. In April 2000, she married a British man named Tony Caddick. Melissa also takes time to lose weight and stay in shape, and she hired a personal trainer to teach her. And he introduced her to various clients, was a financial advisor who managed a currency and finance firm. He was looking for a new office manager, and Melissa saw an opportunity to excel. As their friendship grew, he offered her the role, and Melissa quickly proved herself in her new position. She was diligent and careful, making informed decisions about which risks to take and which to avoid. By 2002, Melissa had sufficient funds to invest $750,000 in the firm, gaining 25% ownership. Her success led to her being featured on the cover of Independent Financial Advisor magazine. Melissa warned investors in the magazine to be cautious of scams and financial pyramids. She advised them to thoroughly check the qualifications and ethics of their financial advisors before making any decisions. However, a year later, Melissa experienced a change of heart and sought to expand her own investments into real estate and the stock market. Melissa's employer had strict policies and refused to support her ambitions, leading to a significant disagreement. As a result, she left the company in 2004, regaining her $750,000 investment. This sudden change prompted Melissa and her husband, Tony, to move to England, a place he was familiar with before their move to Australia. By the summer of 2006, Melissa and Tony had established a comfortable lifestyle in Essex, a picturesque area northeast of London, thanks to Melissa's previous financial success. During this time, Tony qualified as a lawyer, landed a high-profile job. Then they welcomed the birth of their son, marking a joyful milestone in their life together. Melissa struggled with feelings of emptiness, despite significant life changes, such as having children and moving to a new country. With Tony often traveling long hours between Essex and London for work, Melissa often felt lonely at home. Rather than finding a job to fill the void, instead, she became distracted and eventually began an affair with a charming and attractive man named Anthony Khalidi, who happened to be her hairdresser from Sydney. Tony eventually discovered her infidelity a few months later. Melissa secretly spent large sums of money on trips to European cities with her lover, pretending to attend financial conferences to keep up with the latest industry developments. When her husband, Tony, discovered this and confronted her, Melissa became angry and blamed him for her actions, saying he was the reason she had an affair. The argument became so heated that Tony left their home to stay with his parents, temporarily removing himself from Melissa to reduce tension. When he returned a few days later, he found that Melissa had taken their child, most of their possessions, and all their shared savings, selling their furniture and clothes before fleeing to her hometown in Sydney with their son. Upon returning to Australia, Melissa smeared her husband's reputation to everyone, falsely portraying him as the one who cheated, lied, was conservative, and a neglectful father, despite having no solid evidence. She quickly reunited with her new partner, Anthony, after her return to Australia in January 2012. Melissa also took control of their property in England and sold it for a significant $1.3 million. Melissa spent the funds on a life of luxury, moving into a large home with 5 bedrooms and 5 bathrooms in Rose Bay. This is where she began operating a financial pyramid scheme. Throughout her life, Melissa had ambitions of achieving wealth. However, her financial transactions frequently resulted in unfavorable outcomes. Melissa's ex-boyfriend's deception gave her experience, which was to teach her the importance of gaining people's trust in order to manipulate their money. She applied this lesson to her own deceitful practices, including forging signatures on checks, ultimately leaving her husband financially ruined. Melissa was ruthless in using others to get rich. She quickly became bored with her routine and thought about how to achieve her goals. A big plan started to form in her mind. This idea wasn't new to her. She had thought about it for a long time but hadn't acted on it until now. By this point, Melissa had already made a lot of money, but she wasn't satisfied and didn't want to stop. She thought it was too easy to just make money from a few people. Instead, Melissa designed a clever strategy to appeal to a large group of people, join and increase her wealth. In 2012, Melissa began her complex scam by presenting herself as a financial advisor to her friends, family, and acquaintances. She misled her investors by promising unusually high returns on their investments, despite she not having the qualifications or expertise. Once she received their money, Melissa created fake trading account screenshots and sent fabricated monthly reports showing gains of 10, 20, or 30% via email. Melissa's fake successes improved investors' confidence in her. As a result, they invested more money or recommended her to others. Her bank account quickly grew from thousands to millions as she tricked many people, including friends, former co-workers, her personal trainer, relatives, and even her own parents, into giving her their money. With the ill-gotten money she had earned, Melissa's spending became extremely lavish and wasteful. She bought luxury cars, expensive clothing, art, and jewelry, creating a false image of wealth. All of these are from people who have been fooled by her, who had no idea they were financing her lavish lifestyle. Some of her excessive purchases include over $48,000 spent on Chanel products, $275,000 on international travel, $229,000 at Dior, and more than $25,000 on protein shakes. Melissa tried to make her business seem exclusive by telling investors that it was no longer accepting new clients. However, she would later offer them a spot if they invested quickly, making it seem like they were getting a rare opportunity. By 2014, Melissa's wealth allowed her to buy a luxurious $6 million mansion on Orlando Road. The mansion had stunning views of the Sydney Harbour Bridge and featured spacious living areas, a swimming pool, and a large dining room with a panoramic view of the city. In 2016, Melissa gave her husband Anthony a $390,000 Audi R8 as a gift. The car's license plate was customized to represent his music label. Anthony was a musician and part-time DJ. Additionally, Melissa herself owns several expensive cars. Melissa has taken 25 international trips since 2009, visiting places like the ski resorts of Aspen and secluded islands in the South Pacific. However, Melissa's financial situation is complex. Melissa's parents sold the family home in southern Sydney and gave her the money to buy a penthouse in Edgecliff, but on the condition that they could live there for life. However, the penthouse was not jointly owned and was in Melissa's name only. Instead of using the funds to cover the penthouse expenses, she diverted the money for personal spending. One such purchase was a $590,000 diamond. Melissa made her fortune dishonestly and spent millions each year indulging in her extravagant lifestyle. She treated herself to stays at luxury resorts, traveled by private jet, and spared no expense in acquiring whatever she desired. For 8 years, Melissa's complex financial scam went no have difficulty. She ran a Ponzi scheme, using money from new investors to pay returns to those who invested earlier. Her deceitful actions ultimately earned her around 30 million Australian dollars. Melissa was aware that her actions couldn't last forever, but she chose to ignore this reality. Her fraudulent plan started to unravel in 2019 when the Australian Securities and Investments Commission, ASIC, received a tip that Melissa was working as a financial advisor without the required license. Initially, she was not investigated, but by June 2020, the situation had attracted the attention of investigators. Their investigation found that Melissa did not hold a valid Australian financial services license and had been improperly using a former colleague's credentials, having forged documents by adding her own name to them. The information led to serious concerns for the Commission, especially since Melissa had by then dishonestly taken around 30 million Australian dollars from her clients. To investigate further, authorities closely monitored Melissa's activities for several months, carefully recording each transaction. Their thorough investigation eventually found solid evidence of her deceitful actions on November 10, 2020. This prompted the regulatory body to take swift action by freezing Melissa's assets and taking her passport. The next day, a search was conducted at Melissa's luxurious home, valued at over $6 million. When Melissa seemed extremely nervous, showing that she was well aware of the trouble she was in. Her lavish lifestyle is under threat because of serious charges, and she risks a lengthy prison sentence. After her assets were frozen and searched, Melissa disappeared without a trace early the next morning. On the morning of November 12, 2020, Melissa woke up before dawn, dressed in her running clothes, and left the bedroom without disturbing Anthony, who was still asleep. She put on her sneakers and headed to the front door. The soft sound of the door closing was heard by her 14-year-old son, marking the last time she was seen. Melissa went missing, and 30 hours later, Anthony reported her disappearance to the authorities at 11:30 a.m. The news of her disappearance led detectives to launch a thorough investigation. They were suspicious of her disappearance, especially considering her recently uncovered involvement in fraudulent schemes. Authorities from the Australian Securities and Investments Commission, ASIC, were already investigating her for financial deception, and her sudden disappearance fueled their suspicions. As the days passed, family members grew increasingly worried. 1 week went by without any leads or word of her whereabouts, leaving her family in great distress and them to make public appeals, begging her to come forward or at least let them know she was safe. Melissa's actions had severe consequences, as she was accused of defrauding millions of dollars from influential individuals, including her friends and family. The investors she deceived were aware of how extravagantly she had spent their money. Since they knew where she lived, her disappearance created a puzzling mystery. People speculated that Melissa may have escaped to avoid arrest, or that one of the many investors she had defrauded, feeling angry and deceived, kidnapped her in revenge. Investigators began by analyzing Melissa's phone records and found no activity after she disappeared. They also discovered that she had left her essential belongings, including her phone and keys, at her home. Furthermore, her bank transactions stopped, prompting the officers to review local security footage from the day she vanished. However, they couldn't find Melissa in the footage, suggesting that she may have left the area in a private vehicle or been accompanied by someone. Another possibility was that Melissa stayed close by but remained hidden. But this theory was considered unlikely. As the search for Melissa continued, some people began to worry that she might have ended her own life by jumping off the cliffs near her home. However, her loved ones, including Anthony, refused to accept this theory. They believed that Melissa would never leave her young son behind, even if she was facing serious charges that might result in a relatively long prison sentence or a large fine. The authorities expanded their search to the entire Australian territory after seizing Melissa's travel documents and thereby preventing her from leaving the country legally. Melissa's sudden disappearance drew extensive media coverage in Australia and internationally. There were reported sightings in Brisbane, Melbourne, and Darwin. As her identity became known to millions, making it difficult for her to escape. Authorities expected that, given her circumstances, Melissa would eventually surrender herself. The case remained unresolved for 101 days. Until a disturbing clue was found on the shore. On February 21, 2021, two people collecting litter on Bunda Beach in New South Wales noticed a grey sneaker from a distance. As they got closer, they found that the sneaker was still attached to a decomposed and discolored human foot, which was emitting a strong, foul smell. The sneaker had washed up on the beach just hours before it was discovered. Notably, the foot inside the sneaker matched the size and characteristics of Melissa's shoes. Forensic experts began verifying the identity through DNA analysis, while oceanographic scientists studied the Tasman Sea's coastal currents to determine how the foot ended up on Bunda Beach, over 250 miles from the Melissa household. 1 week after the discovery of Melissa's remains, DNA testing confirmed a match with a sample from Melissa's toothbrush, and family members identified the sneaker found at the scene as hers. However, despite this evidence, there was still uncertainty about Melissa's fate, with many people speculating that she might be alive. They believed this was possible because Melissa was suspected of collaborating with her spouse and others to swindle investors out of their savings, and they claimed she was not the type of person to harm herself. This led to suspicions that Melissa may have had help faking her own disappearance to avoid punishment, or that someone else was involved in her vanishing. Melissa's life was rapidly falling apart. Being caught would mean losing everything that mattered to her: her wealth, freedom, friendships, and her family. It's hard to imagine what she was thinking on that critical morning. However, experts were puzzled by the discovery of Melissa's badly decomposed foot, fueling speculation about the authenticity of the scene. Interestingly, Melissa had a connection to the beach, where she had spent many summer vacations as a child. This led some to suspect that she might have cut off her own foot and left it there as a red herring to mislead investigators. A theory that has sparked intense debate. Anthony claimed he was unaware his wife's financial activities were deceitful because he really thought their lavish lifestyle was from the legitimate money they earned. There were rumors that Melissa had borrowed money to invest in cryptocurrency with the intention of repaying her investors and then disappearing. She allegedly planned ways to avoid being detected. Since no new information or evidence came to light, Melissa Caddick was officially declared dead, and the process of dividing her property began. Anthony was dismayed to find that his $390,000 vehicle, along with other assets, was sold at an auction to partially compensate some of the investors who had been affected. The Dew Heights mansion was still legally owned by Melissa. Anthony claimed he needed money to care for Melissa's child because he had very little funds in his bank account, only $19.95. In May 2022, a federal court ordered Anthony to leave the mansion, and by October, the property was put up for sale. Later, Melissa's collection of luxury items, including designer clothes, art, jewelry, and other high-end goods, was sold. The sale proceeds are used to partially repay investors who lost money. Some had invested their entire retirement savings, while others had sold their businesses, hoping to achieve the wealth Melissa had promised. Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Claire Bernal. Claire Bernal was born on August 18, 1983, in Groombridge, a small village located on the border of Kent and East Sussex in England. She spent most of her childhood and teenage years there. Her mother, Patricia Bernal, raised her, while her biological father, who was divorced from her mother, not caring at all about her life or happiness. Growing up, Claire was a friendly and outgoing person who easily connected with others. She had many friends and was well liked by everyone. At the same time, she also was cautious and careful, avoiding bad habits and choosing her social circle wisely. She attended St. Gregory's Catholic School, where she excelled academically and developed an interest in fine arts and dance. She later earned a bachelor's degree in science from private Kent College. As a teenager, Claire had a solid grasp of cosmetics. During her student years, she worked part-time as a makeup artist. This experience inspired her to pursue a career in the field. She completed specialized courses in cosmetology and makeup artistry, including training in theatrical makeup. Claire's skills and knowledge landed her a dream job as a beauty and style consultant at the prestigious Knightsbridge store in Harvey Nichols. This job gives Claire a pretty good salary. She also relocated to London, living together in the same apartment with two friends to share the high cost of living in the capital. Claire earned her colleagues' respect and even took on a mentorship role for new employees, sharing her expertise in decorative cosmetics and skin care. She was known for being a consummate professional, detail-oriented, patient, and kind-hearted. Embracing life in London, Claire seized every opportunity to hone her talents, acquire new skills, and fully immerse herself in her new life. During her initial months at Harvey Nichols, she met Michael Pesh, a senior security guard who appeared to be immediately smitten with her. He was physically attractive and initially tried to attract her attention in a subtle way. However, Michael had a troubled past. A dual citizen of the Czech Republic and Slovakia, he having deserted the army in his home country and fleeing to the UK to avoid responsibility. He was also in the process of a divorce and showed no interest in his young child. Despite his complicated history, Michael's charm won Claire over. For a month, they exchanged sweet nothings, only seeing each other at work. But then, when Michael asked Claire out on a date, she accepted. Unbeknownst to her, this decision ultimately took her life. Their first date encounter occurred at a quaint London coffee shop, where they spent the evening engaged in conversation, sharing stories about their lives. During this meeting, Michael revealed to Claire that he was married, but expressed his intention to divorce his wife as soon as possible, as he wanted to spend the rest of his life with her. Although these things made Claire uncomfortable, she initially dismissed it, thinking he must be joking. When Claire shared the story with her mother, Patricia, her mother also found it unusual. Because Claire's suitor was not only a foreigner but also 8 years older and already married. She advised Claire to avoid meeting with Michael again, but she reassured her mother that everything was okay. On the second date, Michael took Claire to an amusement park, gave her a beautiful bouquet of flowers, and showered her with compliments. He kissed her and expressed his love. However, Claire was unsure if Michael was being genuine or joking. She later talked to her mother, who advised her to stop seeing him. Although Claire agreed that Michael's behavior was unusual, she liked him and wanted to get to know him better. A week later, Michael asked Claire out on another date, and she agreed. However, this time he was overly persistent and possessive, confessing his love and telling Claire that he would never let her go. Claire felt not only confused and discouraged but also frightened. She decided that this would be their last date and that she would end their relationship. In total, they had only 3 dates, and their affair lasted less than a month. Despite this short time together, but Michael became overly possessive, believing Claire belonged to him. From that moment on, Claire's life turned into a nightmare. Soon, Michael took a trip to the Czech Republic, intending to meet with his wife and finalize their divorce. However, he failed to do so. During his absence, Claire managed to erase him to the back of her mind, resuming her normal life and convincing herself that Michael was a thing of the past. That changed when Michael called Claire one evening and asked her to meet him at the airport. At first, Claire said no, but Michael made her feel guilty, saying he really needed her help. So, Claire agreed to meet him, and also offered to let him stay with her for a day because he said he had nowhere to go, having moved out of his old apartment and unable to move into his new one yet. But as soon as Michael set foot in her home, he revealed his true intentions. He wanted to live with her from now on. Claire was terrified and ordered him to leave immediately, but he refused. The situation has become stressful to the point where Claire and her neighbors threatened to call the police if Michael didn't leave. He eventually left the apartment, but he remained sitting on the corridor until morning. The next day, at work, Claire attempted to end things with Michael, explaining that their 3 dates hadn't meant much to her. However, Michael refused to listen and instead asked for another chance to correct the mistake and prove his feelings. He showed up with a large bouquet of scarlet roses and walked Claire home, despite her refusal to accept the flowers. That night, Michael sat on the doorstep of Claire's apartment, refusing to leave even when a neighbor tried to intervene. He becomes aggressive, making a chilling threat. It would be easier for him to kill Claire than to let her go. His behavior and crazed look made it clear that he was serious. Although Michael claims to love Claire very much, his behavior suggests that he wants to control her. Claire tried to remain calm and reason with him, explaining that she had no feelings for him and regretted going on the dates. However, Michael responded by hugging her tightly and whispering that she loved him, but she just didn't realize it yet. He then attempted to kiss her, but Claire managed to break free from his grasp. The following months were incredibly difficult for Claire. She confided in her mother, revealed that she felt nervous and scared, knowing what to expect. She felt like she was about to have a nervous breakdown. At work, Michael would repeatedly walk past her store, staring at Claire throughout the day. He bombarded her with dozens of phone calls and sent up to 50 messages daily. In these messages, he confessing his love, pleading for forgiveness, and begging her to take him back, then making explicit threats, insisting that they would eventually be together again. Claire had changed her phone number multiple times, but Michael consistently managed to obtain her new number within a couple of days. What's more concerning was that he knew her home address and frequently staked out her house. At one point, Claire attempted to move to a new residence to escape the harassment, but Michael secretly followed her after work and discovered her new address. Michael seemed to believe that he and Claire were still in a relationship. He counts how many months have passed since their first meeting, first date, first kiss, and suggested celebrating these milestones. His messages often contained threatening language, stating that if Claire wasn't with him, she wouldn't be with anyone else, and that he would ensure it. Claire's mental and physical health suffered greatly due to the harassment. She was crying daily, and found it difficult to concentrate on her job. Her fear grew to the point where she was afraid to leave her home. Every phone call made her jump, and nightmares plagued her at night. Claire's health issues led to significant weight loss, a disheveled appearance, and a loss of her former confidence and vitality. Eventually, Claire's mother, friends, and colleagues convinced her to report the harassment to the police, and she finally agreed to take. To address the situation, Claire initially came to meet the head of security at the mall where she worked. As a former police officer, he took her complaints seriously and began investigating. He spoke with other employees and reviewed numerous surveillance videos, becoming convinced that Michael was indeed stalking Claire. In an attempt to resolve the issue, the head of security reassigned Michael to a different floor and a distant area of the mall. However, this measure had little effect, and Michael's behavior persisted. Michael spent most of his time outside the Knightsbridge store, watching Claire. Eventually, the department store management felt compelled to terminate his employment due to his failure to fulfill his duties. Despite this, the harassment persisted, and Claire decided to involve the police, despite Michael's threats. When questioned, Michael vehemently denied any wrongdoing, claiming his intentions were pure and that he only wanted to rekindle their relationship. Michael asserted that his words may have been misinterpreted due to his accent, and that he never threatened her. The police heard Claire's account of the events, but they failed to consult with her colleagues and roommates who had directly witnessed the incidents. These witnesses could have confirmed that Michael had been stalking Claire for months and had made multiple threats against her life. However, the police consider the situation is no serious. As a result, Michael received only a minor fine and a warning, and was banned from the shopping center where Claire worked and from approaching her. However, just one day after being questioned and informed of the ban, Michael returned to Claire's house and was seen peering intently through her windows. Then, Claire contacted the police upon seeing him, but he had left by the time they arrived. On June 10, 2005, Claire reported Michael's harassment and violation of the restraining order to the police again. However, he disappeared before the officers arrived, and they showed negligence in not pursuing the matter further. It wasn't until the third incident that Michael was finally arrested. He offered no resistance and remained calm, allowing himself to be handcuffed. He was charged with stalking and harassment, spent a week in jail, and was released on bail. His trial was set for August 31, 2005. Before the trial, Claire decided to take a break and went on vacation with her mother and a friend to a popular Italian resort. They enjoyed the warm weather and relaxing atmosphere, and Claire begins to think her nightmare is over. Upon returning to London, she was relieved to find that Michael was no longer following her. Unbeknownst to her, this was not the end of her torment. Meanwhile, Michael returned to his home country, where he spent time at shooting ranges, improving his marksmanship skills and obtaining a permit to purchase a pistol. After smuggling the gun into the UK, he made no attempt to contact Claire before their scheduled court appearance. During the hearing, Michael remained calm, pleaded guilty, and apologized, claiming he had no intention of causing harm. Despite this, he was released once again without receiving any punishment. The following 2 weeks were uneventful, and Claire finally believed it was all over and Michael would leave her alone. Michael, a former senior security guard, utilized his knowledge of the building's layout to enter undetected. He suddenly appeared behind Claire, catching her partner off guard. Before she could react, a shot was fired. Michael shot Claire in the back of the head at close range, followed by 3 more shots to her face. The gunshots triggered chaos in the store, with people screaming, running, and hiding. However, instead of targeting customers, Michael fired 1 more shot into the ceiling and then ended his own life by shooting himself in the temple. Claire, whom he had stalked and manipulated for almost a year, was dead, and he had chosen not to live without her. When medical and the police arrived, then everything was too late. The aftermath was devastating for Patricia Bernal, Claire's mother. Returning home late from her sister's birthday party, she was met with the sight of police at her front door. Upon learning of Claire's death, Patricia's first reaction was to ask if Michael was responsible. Overcome with emotion, she covered her face with her hands and burst into tears. Reflecting on that night, Patricia remembered not having any premonitions or feelings of unease. She had always believed that she would be able to sense if Claire was in danger and protect her, but that wasn't the case. The examination revealed that Michael was under the influence by addictive substances when the crime occurred. Furthermore, a few months prior to the tragedy, Michael had consulted with a department store employee who was also a law student at a prestigious London university. He inquired about the punishment for the crime and the circumstances that could be considered mitigating factors. Claire and other colleagues became aware of this conversation, which frightened Claire. She reported her concerns to the police, said them that Michael might be planning to harm her. However, the police officers took no action in response to her warning. The crime were largely due to the negligence of law enforcement. Despite Claire's repeated requests for help and protection over nearly a year, but the police failed to grasp the severity of the situation. Michael was arrested twice, but then yet released on minimal bail. He ignored a court-ordered restraining order, openly threatened Claire. He even consulted a lawyer about punishment if a crime happens, but the police still felt this was not enough to arrest him in jail. Michael was able to leave the country, acquire firearms, and return to carry out his deadly plan without any obstacles. Meanwhile, crucial witnesses, including colleagues and roommates who personally heard Michael threatening Claire, were never questioned by the authorities during this time. It wasn't until Michael killed Claire and then himself that law enforcement finally realized the gravity of the situation and the numerous mistakes they had made. Claire's mom, Patricia, took action to seek justice. She collaborated with other families who had experienced similar losses. Together, they initiated a nationwide program to support stalking victims. As a result of their efforts, stalking was reclassified as a serious offense under the law. By 2012, a new law had been enacted that prohibited stalking entirely. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Frank Spencer. Frank Spencer was born on November 10, 1965 in Bloomsburg, Pennsylvania, to Cyrus and Melanie Spencer. Growing up, he enjoyed active games and sports, which helped him develop a strong physique. During his high school years, Frank excelled as a member of the wrestling team and showed exceptional leadership abilities. After graduating from high school in 1984, Frank continued his studies at a local university and completed his studies in 1988. After the death of his father, Frank took over the family business, becoming the owner of Spencer's Auto Parts and Used Cars. An important event in the young man's life took place in 1997, when he met Maria through a mutual friend, Paul Siciliano. Frank Spencer and Maria immediately became close, attracted to each other's dynamic personalities. Maria was known for her hot temper, strong will and bold personality, and was also extremely affectionate. However, not everyone was happy with the relationship. Maria's father, Anthony Rocco, did not approve of Frank and even tried to prevent their marriage. Frank's family was also unhappy with his choice. Due to the opposition of both families, the couple decided to elope and rent an apartment. Eventually, their families were forced to accept their feelings. Maria and Frank got married and started a family, having a son and a daughter. They moved to a new house, and Frank worked hard to provide for his family through his auto parts business and sponsorship of racing cars. As the head of the family, his children became his top priority and motivation. However, Maria's priorities were different. She doesn't take care of her family, she's cold to the kids. Unlike her husband, she's not passionate about the marriage. She loves to spend what Frank earns, and what really worries her is money. Maria's behavior increasingly caused problems in their marriage. Frank became increasingly dissatisfied with her selfishness and eccentric behavior. He felt that as a mother, she should grow up and think of others. However, Maria did not change. In 2006, he filed for divorce, fed up with his wife's inappropriate behavior. Sometimes she behaved so irrationally that Frank feared for the children's health. At that time, the idea of divorce seemed like the only right solution. However, the confrontation became more tense as Frank sought to gain custody of the children. He did not trust his ex-wife Maria and believed that she was not capable of properly caring for the children. However, not everyone agreed with his stance. His friend Ron argued that both parents were necessary for the healthy development of the children and advised Frank to negotiate a joint custody agreement with Maria. Despite this, Frank was adamant about pursuing sole custody, believing he knew what was best. In response, Maria also pushed for sole custody and was expecting to receive a substantial child support payment. Their conflict, which grew over time. On several occasions, Maria's erratic behavior led to her attacking him and the children. Frank had to call the police. However, some people did not believe Frank. and an incident that happened in 2008 proved his testimony to be true. An argument broke out between Maria and her ex-mother-in-law near her children's school, leading to Maria's arrest. The problem started when Maria went to pick up her daughter, but Frank's mother intervened, trying to stop her. It was later revealed that there was an agreement between the two. Frank's mother would be the one to pick up the children that day. But Maria changed her mind at the last minute, deliberately taking the children away. After the fight, Maria picked up the child and put her in the car, but did not put her in a seatbelt. The police stopped the car and determined that Maria's actions endangered the child's life and health. As a result, Maria faced charges of disorderly conduct. Furthermore, her ex-husband, Frank, accused her of stalking, claiming that she had followed him on multiple occasions. However, the prosecution could not prove that the child's life was in danger, so the police offered Maria a deal. They would drop the child endangerment charges if she pleaded guilty to disorderly conduct and stalking. Maria accepted the deal, pleading guilty and being fined $600. Despite this, Maria did not change her behavior. Instead, she became more outrageous after the incident. Frank's acquaintances and relatives grew increasingly concerned as he shared his complaints about Maria. She began to threaten and her stalking behavior continued. Several of Maria's co-workers later revealed that she often expressed deep hatred for Frank, even stating that she was willing to end his life. This led one co-worker to jokingly call her the Black Widow. Despite the tension, Frank tried to stay calm and resolve the situation amicably. He tried to reason with Maria several times, but she refused to stop her behavior. As a precaution, Frank began to record their conflicts. His intention was not to get Maria into legal trouble, but to have evidence in case things escalated further. Frank just wanted to live and work in peace, but Maria's actions continued to cross the line. By 2009, the Frank's divorce proceedings had dragged on for a long time, with the children staying with their father, Frank. Meanwhile, Frank had begun dating a woman named Julie Dent. Although Maria claimed that she did not mind Frank's new relationship, she was said to have been upset by Julie's closeness to the children. Frank believed that Maria's jealousy was the root cause of the troubles. Maria's anger grew, and in February 2009, she left a voicemail warning Julie to stay away from her children. However, the situation really escalated when Maria's father, Rocco, was released from prison after 5 years for fraud. Frank knew of his ex-father-in-law's reputation and feared more trouble, believing that Maria had inherited her father's erratic temperament. At this point, those around Frank noticed that he was becoming increasingly anxious. After Rocco is released, a robbery occurs at Frank's office, where important documents related to the divorce proceedings are stolen. The next day, Maria contacts Frank, saying that she discovered a trash bag containing interesting items on the porch. Frank understands the implication and advises her to return the stolen items. He also reports the break-in to the police, but despite their best efforts, they are unable to prove that anyone was involved in the incident. According to the police, no evidence of the perpetrators was found. However, it is clear that Maria and her father had a motive for the crime. The investigation considered Maria a suspect, but the case was eventually dropped due to lack of evidence. The police's efforts led Maria to return the documents she had taken from Frank, as these documents did not contain any important information that could be used as evidence in court. The situation continued to worsen until it reached a breaking point. Maria began sending threats to Frank's new girlfriend, Julie, on social media. She was still upset that the children were still in contact with Julie. Unlike Maria, Julie remained calm and enjoyed spending time with Frank and the children. She tried not to get involved in a complicated relationship between Frank and his ex-wife, but Julie was deeply troubled and Maria prioritized revenge over parental responsibility. The disputes between Frank and his ex-wife Maria continued until 2010, when Frank finally lost patience. He went to the police and asked them to evaluate Maria's behavior, providing their correspondence as evidence. The correspondence contained indirect threats, but Maria claimed that this was her way of communicating and that she had no intention of causing harm. Once again, Maria's guilt could not be proven because her warnings sounded vague. This time, Maria was not punished. In January 2010, Frank and Julie planned a romantic getaway to the Caribbean, but on the eve of the trip, a fire broke out at his mother's house. Although no one was injured, the house was devastated by flames and smoke. Witnesses reported that Maria drove up to the scene with her neighbors and acquaintances, smiled at the fire, and drove away. After firefighters extinguished the fire, a dog owned by one of Frank's children was found in the ashes. The incident became so serious that Frank had to call the police again, as it became clear that the fire was no accident. Maria's actions had escalated to the point where it was clear that she would not stop until she achieved her goal. The police found no evidence of arson in the first fire, and the fire was ruled an accident. Maria later sent Frank a text message in which she gloated about what had happened, and wrote about how karma had caught up with him, and that since her life had been ruined, he could expect more consequences. When the police took no action, Maria became bolder and began openly threatening Frank and his new partner Julie. A few months later, a fire broke out at Julie's house. Fortunately, she was able to escape by jumping from the porch. But her house was severely damaged and uninhabitable. Frank invited Julie to move in with him, although he was concerned that this would anger Maria further, but they had no choice. At the same time, an investigation into the cause of the fire was underway. Since Julie's home was in a different district, she and Frank hoped that the police investigation would be fair. However, the police were unable to help due to lack of evidence, and the fire was ruled an accident. Despite this, Julie was determined to get to the bottom of the matter and appealed to her superiors. This prompted the investigation. Unexpectedly, flares were found in Julie's backyard. Further investigation revealed another flare that could have caused the fire. In addition, experts determined that the steps on the roof of the house had been doused with a flammable mixture. Ultimately, after all the tests and examinations, the cause of the fire was determined to be arson. However, as in previous cases, no one was directly implicated in the crime due to lack of evidence. And those responsible were able to avoid punishment once again. In the summer of 2012, Frank and Julie made a plan to pretend to break up to distract Maria. However, the expected peace did not last long, when Frank's body was discovered on July 3rd, just a few weeks after the couple broke up. When Joe, a friend of Frank's, decided to visit Frank because he had not heard from him recently, when Joe arrived at the bungalow, he felt increasingly worried. The front door was slightly open and there were stains near the entrance. When he entered the house, he saw Frank lying on the floor, dead. Joe moved closer and noticed dried blood in Frank's ear. Without hesitation, he called the emergency services. As news of the incident spread throughout the county, people suspected they knew who was responsible for this heinous crime. Police found several key pieces of evidence at the scene, including large pools of blood, extensive drag marks, clear shoe prints on the floor, and bloody gloves in the kitchen. These were sent for analysis, which revealed that the shoe prints matched the size and style of shoes worn by Maria's father, Rocco. Additionally, Maria's skin particles were discovered inside the gloves, although she had not lived with Frank for over a year, making it unlikely that the gloves had been left behind by accident. The evidence linked Rocco and Maria to the crimes, leading to their arrests. An autopsy and ballistics analysis revealed that Frank had been shot with two different types of guns. He was initially shot with a .30 caliber sniper rifle while standing near the front door. A sniper's nest was discovered approximately 115 feet from the house. The bullet passed through Frank's hand and into his chest, severing a vital artery and causing a fatal wound. However, the attackers continued to attack. They dragged Frank into the house, where a second shot was fired into his head with a .357 Magnum revolver. By that time, the man was already dead, so the final shot was considered an act of revenge. The violent nature of the crime suggests that the shooter had a deep hatred for Frank. Based on this evidence, police suspect that Rocco fired the first shot from the sniper rifle, while Maria fired the last shot. Additionally, police discovered that Frank's car and dog were missing from the house. A review of traffic camera footage showed that Frank's car had been driven away from his home onto an interstate. However, the identity of the driver could not be determined. The car was later found in Sunbury, Pennsylvania, 27 miles from Frank's home and 5 miles from Maria's. However, no fingerprints or other evidence were found inside the car. 2 days after the incident, Frank's dog was found at a wedding in Dauphin. Attendees immediately recognized the dog as well-groomed, with an electronic chip, and the dog was returned to Frank's mother. It turned out that Frank had acquired a new pet for his children after a fire. This lucky discovery helped to clarify some aspects and effectively expose the crime. According to the investigation, the criminals took the dog with them when they fled the scene. On the way home, Rocco stopped, and during this time, attracted by the smell of food nearby, the dog escaped. It then went to a house where a wedding was taking place. This allowed the police to prove that Rocco's phone was near the wedding venue on the day of the murder, while his Harrisburg residence was 12 miles away, contradicting his claim that he was at home. It is likely that Maria was the one who came up with the idea of bringing the dog to the children, but this decision proved to be a mistake. During questioning, Rocco admitted that his son-in-law had asked him for help several times and had visited him the day before his death, which would explain the traces found at the crime scene. However, Rocco could not explain the presence of the pool of blood. His testimony did not sound sincere, and no one could confirm whether the men were on good terms. Rocco confessed that Frank had given him the car that same day, likely in an attempt to justify the finding of his fingerprints in the victim's home. By making this statement, Rocco inadvertently admitted to having been present at the crime scene the day before. Searches were conducted at Rocco's and Maria's homes for the murder weapon, but no weapon was found, as it was likely that Rocco had thrown it away. Maria also denied any guilt, claiming that the glove had accidentally appeared in Frank's home, possibly brought there by the children. Ultimately, the suspects were released to go home. However, the police continued to collect evidence necessary for the case. The police found a new lead when Derek Reed, a friend of Frank's, spoke to Maria at a school football game. Maria revealed that the last thing her husband saw before he died was her face. This new information caught the attention of the state attorney general, who was already unhappy with the way the police handled Frank's reports. Many people also complained about the matter, and an internal investigation was launched. However, it was difficult to prove that the police had neglected their duties. The police claimed that much of the information Frank provided lacked concrete evidence. The police attempted to determine the guilt of the suspects in the case, as well as their involvement in previous crimes, including stalking. And the major interrogation took place in 2013. Maria and Rocco maintained their innocence throughout the process, denying all 12 charges against them. However, their unwillingness to cooperate with the investigation led to charges of providing false testimony. Prosecutors said that Maria and Rocco arrived at Frank's house together, deliberately not using their own car to avoid attention, instead fleeing the scene in a victim's car. In late 2014, Maria was arrested again. Meanwhile, Rocco escaped. After a final interrogation, he boarded a plane and flew to Colombia. Police considered his actions an escape attempt and evidence of his guilt. For nearly a year, Rocco evaded arrest, but was finally arrested in Buenos Aires, Argentina. He was arrested by local police and Rocco attempted to fight deportation back to the United States. However, his efforts were unsuccessful and he was returned to his homeland to face justice. In the fall of 2015, Maria went to trial. Throughout the proceedings, she maintained her innocence and instead blamed her father for the crimes. Maria claimed that she loved Frank and never wanted him dead. However, many witnesses came forward to reveal her true nature, sharing accounts of persistent threats, stalking, and arson. The trial lasted more than a week, after which the jury returned a verdict, finding Maria Spencer guilty on all charges. These included murder, arson, burglary, conspiracy, and menacing. As a result, Maria was sentenced to life in prison without parole, plus an additional 50 years. Court observers said Maria smiled throughout the trial. In a later interview, she explained her behavior, saying, "Because I didn't end his life, I tried to stay positive." A few years later, Rocco's trial began. He was furious about his daughter's accusations. Rocco claimed he was only trying to help his daughter and opposed violence. He wanted to say that Maria was the one who encouraged the crime. Despite his claims, physical evidence showed that Rocco was more involved than he let on. In the fall of 2018, Rocco Franklin was convicted of murder, robbery, and arson. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole, plus 45 years. When he was sentenced, Rocco, 77, blew a kiss to the prosecutor and police, then cursed the judge. Years later, Rocco asked for a retrial, arguing that his defense attorney had been ineffective in his conviction. Maria also tried to appeal her case, but both father and son were unsuccessful. Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Teresa Conal. James Conal was born on February 22, 1950, in Dayton, Ohio. He was the son of Ruth Slack and John Conley. They had 4 more daughters and 3 sons. The family was wealthy. His grandfather, Fred Conley, was a successful businessman and inventor who founded a company and held nearly 300 patents for innovations, including one of the first price marking machines. Despite his business success, little is known about James' early life. However, it is clear that he chose a different career path. Instead of joining the family business, he moved to North Georgia, where he worked diligently to create a successful company in the field of holistic medicine. James was assisted by Bonnie White, the accounting manager of his company. In return for her work, James also provided chiropractic care to Bonnie's children and grandchildren. As Bonnie said, James's kind and compassionate nature helped him build a loyal clientele. Over time, the business grew and James realized the need to hire more employees. At the time, 21-year-old Teresa Conal applied for the job and was accepted. She would be responsible for welcoming visitors to the company. Teresa, who was from Harlan, Kentucky, met James when she got a job at his company. Despite their 20-year age difference, they fell in love and began dating. After marrying in 1997, Teresa and her husband had their first son, Caleb, in 1996. They later opened the Alpha Wellness Center in Dalton, Georgia. At the center, Teresa worked as a massage therapist, helping people achieve good health. As a friend of the couple, Bonnie witnessed their professional growth. She said that Teresa was a truly wonderful massage therapist. Their second child, Allison, was born in 2000. And soon after, they moved to a spacious house in Ringgold, Georgia, located near the tennis courts. The marriage was stable and happy, and the children grew up in comfort and love. Christmas was a special time of year for Caleb, who immersed himself in the joy of the holiday season, surrounded by gifts, a beautifully decorated tree, and the warmth of a fireplace. As he immersed himself in the happiness of the moment, he dreamed of many ways to protect himself and, in turn, his loved ones. James took out a $500,000 life insurance policy from Tom Drew, naming Teresa as the sole beneficiary. He also insured their home at the same time. However, their ideal life begins to fall apart over time due to growing rumors of infidelity in their marriage. At Alpha Healthcare, the news eventually spread to all the staff. Unfortunately, the situation worsened due to rumors of infidelity in James and Teresa's marriage, as well as financial difficulties. James's health began to decline after contracting Lyme disease, leaving him unable to work. Meanwhile, Teresa underwent 4 surgeries and suffered a miscarriage, leading to severe depression and substance abuse. At the same time, Bonnie discovered that Teresa had been illegally embezzling money from the business. In 1 month, Teresa herself wrote 16 checks. When James confronted her about this in front of Bonnie, his wife denied everything, claiming that the checks had been canceled. However, Bonnie, as the accountant, claimed that the canceled checks would not be cleared through the bank, and she later produced a bank statement, putting Teresa in an awkward position. A rumor began to circulate among the couple's staff, claiming that Teresa had secretly put lithium in James's coffee. James himself eventually revealed the rumor, rather than suppress the speculation. An investigation revealed that their relationship had deteriorated to the point where divorce was being considered, although the details remained unclear. By mid-2007, the family situation had become unstable. 2 cars had been repossessed and James appeared visibly depressed. However, the announcement that he was about to be evicted for failing to pay the mortgage was a wake-up call for the couple. Teresa devised a plan to resolve her marital, financial and personal crises. The plan began with her pretending to be her husband and writing a letter to their agent, Tom Drew, stating that her husband had decided to end his life. Early on Friday morning, June 29, 2007, Teresa prepared to carry out the rest of her plan. During their usual breakfast, Teresa secretly added strong antidepressants to her husband's food. In the meantime, she refused to eat, telling her husband that a friend named Robin would be picking her and the children up. The woman took the children to a friend's house after James had taken the medication. Teresa then returned home to prepare for her trip. She quickly gathered what she considered important items, including photos of the children. Next, she lit a fire between the office and the bedroom. Caleb and his sister were waiting in the car and saw their mother leave the house last. She lit a cigarette as she walked away. From the car, Caleb noticed smoke coming from the house and became frightened. He warned his mother about the smoke, but she reassured him that it was just burning papers and that there was nothing to worry about. Gary Carlock, a local grocery store owner, was on his way to work when he saw smoke coming from a house and quickly called emergency services. Fire crews arrived at the scene at 9:42 a.m. After assessing the situation, they determined that the fire could not be extinguished from the outside, so they decided to enter the house through the back door, which led directly to the bedroom. A firefighter examined the room and noticed a disturbing image on their thermal imaging equipment, indicating the presence of a person. As they cautiously approached through the smoke, they found the person kneeling by the bed, apparently praying. The person was unconscious but did not appear to have suffered severe heat burns. However, their skin and clothing were heavily covered in smoke. Firefighters described the scene as a typical arson fire. They initially identified the victim as James, 57, the homeowner, and quickly pronounced him dead. The raging fire destroyed everything, including potential DNA evidence or signs of foul play, leading police to initially suspect the death was accidental. Police eventually reached James' wife, Teresa, by phone to report the incident, who was in Georgia. When Teresa left town, she contacted her insurance agent just minutes later. However, the children were devastated to hear the news about James, their beloved father. Although they had their own problems, he always showed them how important they were in his life. An extensive investigation was launched, but progress was slow due to a lack of leads. Teresa was interviewed by police that evening and recounted the events of the morning. She said she left the house at 8:15 a.m. and stopped at a restaurant on the way. Robin, Teresa's friend, was also questioned, and his story largely matched Teresa's, except that he claimed they left 30 minutes later, at 8:45 a.m. The fire inspector determined that the fire started at a point along the shared wall between the office and the bedroom where the victim was found. As officers continued to search the house, a trained dog was brought in to assist. The dog helped detect the presence of arson at the source of the fire, clearly indicating that it was set deliberately rather than accidentally. On July 5, 2007, officers interviewed Teresa to piece together the events of that day. Teresa stated that she loved her husband very much and attributed their financial difficulties solely to James' illness. She described their marriage as stable and reliable. Friends and colleagues of James confirmed that his failing health had forced him to stop working, causing difficulties for his business. At the time, Tom Drew reported to police that he had received a handwritten letter from James in which James expressed his intention to end his life. However, there were countless ways to do it, much simpler, less painful. It was hard to believe he would choose such a method. The medical examiner determined James' cause of death to be smoke inhalation, and toxicology tests showed that he had been under the influence of strong antidepressants at the time of the fire. Burns on the soles of his feet indicated that he had tried to put out the flames. Based on this evidence, forensic psychologist Sanji believed the death was the result of homicide. Police re-interviewed Robin, focusing on inconsistencies between his account of events and Teresa's. Robin testified that after putting the children in the car, Teresa went back into the house and did not return for 15 to 20 minutes. The investigation led the team to a restaurant where Teresa and her children stopped for a snack. Security footage showed them arriving at 9:17 a.m. on the day of the fire. Since their home was only a 10-minute drive away, police suspected that Teresa might have been home when the fire started. A closer look at the timeline confirmed this theory, and police obtained a search warrant for Teresa Connell's home. When they arrived, they found the family's personal belongings stored in the garage, as well as unfiled divorce papers. Further investigation uncovered 2 insurance policies, one for life and one for the home. As police zeroed in on Teresa, they learned details about the loss of her youngest child and her subsequent drug addiction. From that point on, based on the evidence they found, she was considered the prime suspect. During a subsequent interview, the couple's employees talked about rumors of an affair, so police decided to call Teresa back. During her second conversation with the police, Teresa not only defended herself, but also began to change her story. According to Teresa, her husband James was a cruel madman, and she even said that in her opinion, he was capable of starting the fire himself, even if it meant completely destroying the property. When asked by the police, she told them about the morning of the incident. Teresa tried to recall her morning routine. She said that she and her husband usually woke up around 6:30 to 7 o'clock. They usually spent this time together, either drinking coffee or chatting. However, she could not provide further details, saying that her actions were out of habit. The drugs found in James' blood were the first topic that the police wanted to address, so they started by asking Teresa about the drugs her husband was taking. Initially, she listed them without any problem, but when the police wanted to know which specific drug made James sleepy, she suddenly forgot the name. She then asked for a moment. She tried to recall the name, which began with a C, presumably C. Carville. However, when asked about the insurance policy, which they believed would be a crucial solution to the woman's problems, Teresa chose to downplay its importance, claiming that she did not even care to know the value of the policy. It was clear that the investigation would be difficult, but Teresa persisted. The police then revealed an equally important piece of information. An incendiary substance had been discovered at the crime scene, but Teresa once again seemed to dodge the issue. Teresa defended her actions by explaining that her husband had painted the house a few days earlier, which would explain the presence of an incendiary substance. She also suggested that this substance could have been the cause of the fire and could have accelerated the spread of the fire. During the investigation, Teresa mentioned that she and her husband often drank coffee together every morning. The police found this information suspicious, thinking that she might have taken advantage of this opportunity to secretly give her husband sedatives. However, Teresa later revealed that her husband had not had coffee with her in recent months. This statement was completely contrary to her previous statement, and the police immediately pointed out the contradiction. Teresa even denied her own words and contradicted herself. At that time, the police only had circumstantial evidence against her, until one of them suggested that she take a lie detector test, suggesting that she would do everything to prove that she did not kill her husband. However, before the test, Teresa was required to sign a written agreement stating that if the results showed deception, the police could use this evidence against her in court. As she prepared to undergo the test, Teresa's concerns shifted from the original crime to a new fear, the possibility that the polygraph test could be used as evidence against her if she failed. Before taking the polygraph test, she was concerned about how much information the police had on her, as a false answer could seriously damage her case. However, the results of the polygraph test showed that she exceeded the maximum lie detector threshold, indicating that she was likely hiding something. Based on the evidence gathered, on July 9, 2007, Teresa, 34, was charged with premeditated murder and 2 counts of first-degree arson. Her attorney later argued that the fire that led to the charges was actually a joint plan between Teresa and her husband, designed to improve their financial situation. After Teresa was arrested, her children, Allison, 6, and Caleb, 11, were placed in the care of Georgia Children and Family Services. During an interview on July 16, Caleb showed a surprising level of interest for his age. He told police what had happened that morning, including his mother returning home while he and his sister were in the car. Caleb also mentioned noticing smoke shortly afterward. He explained that his parents often burned trash in the backyard, which made the smoke seem normal at first. However, police said it was unlikely that his mother would have chosen to burn the trash just before leaving. Instead, they suspect she may have given James drugs that rendered him unconscious, then set fire to the bedroom while he was still in bed. Understandably, this was difficult for the children. However, despite the traumatic experience deeply affecting their young minds, they remained strong. Caleb's grandparents were then able to obtain custody, and the court was compassionate enough to allow Teresa to visit them. The police then shared evidence with Teresa, clarifying that her children could be called to testify against her. Initially, her defense contacted the district attorney's office, asking for a plea deal. The deputy district attorney investigating the case admitted that she had reached a fair and reasonable plea deal, not wanting her children to go through such trauma. 2 days after the trial, Teresa accepted the plea deal. On the morning of December 10, 2010, a hearing was held. At the hearing, the judge asked Teresa if she would plead guilty to aggravated manslaughter, to which she answered yes. Teresa later explained to the court that her actions were part of a financial scheme, but that she never intended to harm her husband. She asked the court for leniency. The court accepted her testimony and, as a result, granted her more visitation time with her children. Additionally, Teresa Conal was convicted of first-degree arson. The state dropped the premeditated murder charge as part of the plea agreement. Teresa was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after serving 30 years. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of James Dale Ritchie. Summer 2016 in Anchorage, Alaska's most populous city, which serves as the de facto capital and is home to around 300,000 residents. On July 3, 2016, at 7:40 a.m., a woman riding a bicycle was the first to report a disturbing discovery to the 911. She found the bodies of two young men lying in the grass next to a road called Ship Creek. From their clothing, it appeared that they were a young man and woman with severe head injuries and a large amount of blood around them, leading people to assume that they were dead. The cyclist quickly realized that something terrible had happened to these people and immediately called for help. Sadly, when paramedics and police arrived, the victims were beyond help, having died shortly before they were discovered, as evidenced by the warmth remaining in their bodies. It was clear that their deaths were the result of a violent attack. Autopsies confirmed that they had been shot in the chest and head. Police identified the deceased as Jason Nett, 41, and Brianna Foys, 20, through their identification cards. Brianna was born in 1996 and had a difficult childhood, which led to her and her sister being placed in a refugee camp. However, their lives changed for the better when Brianna was 5 years old. Marcella Foy's family adopted them, creating a family with other children. Brianna suffered from attachment disorder, which made it difficult for her to form emotional bonds with her caregivers. This led to trust issues and challenges adapting to new situations, as well as problems interacting with others socially. Despite these obstacles, however, Brianna was an energetic, outgoing young woman with a strong passion for music, especially Broadway shows. She had a talent for singing and often shared short videos of her performances. However, behind her positive exterior and love of life, Brianna faced many difficulties. Her adoptive mother, Marcella, revealed that Brianna's developmental issues hindered her ability to make good choices, especially when it came to the people she chose to spend time with and the situations she found herself in. As a result, she fell into the wrong crowd. This led her to experiment with psychoactive substances and develop a substance abuse problem. Her foster mother, Marcella, tried to help Brianna by encouraging her to seek help and treatment. However, by the time Brianna turned 18, she was an adult and free to make her own decisions, even if they were not in her best interests. Unfortunately, Brianna chose to prioritize her independence and decided to go it alone, resisting her mother's efforts to guide her down a better path. She became homeless again due to family rules and her financial situation. However, she maintained a close relationship with her mother and temporarily stayed in homeless shelters. Jason Nett, another victim of the incident, also had a hard time getting his life together. With his kind and helpful nature and love of nature and animals, he was well liked by everyone. Unfortunately, Jason struggled with drug addiction and had several run-ins with the law. His unemployment further complicated his life, leaving him unable to provide child support for his two daughters. In the summer of 2016, he found temporary shelter at a landfill in Anchorage near the Ship Creek Bike Trail, where both he and Brianna were eventually found dead. Despite their age difference, Jason and Brianna formed a strong friendship after a long period of homelessness. Jason became a protector in Brianna's life, especially since she was a child. He tried to protect her from harm, but unfortunately, he was unable to do so, as tragic circumstances led to both of them being shot and killed near a trail. Upon arriving, the police's first action was to thoroughly inspect the victims and the crime scene. They quickly observed that there were no shell casings near the victims, leading them to deduce that the killer may have used a revolver, a type of gun known for its ability to retain the shell casing inside the chamber when fired. Additionally, a bullet was discovered near where Jason and Brianna lay, indicating that the shooter had aimed at the couple but missed, instead hitting a nearby wooden fence. The bullet was seized as evidence and sent for forensic examination. Expert analysis confirmed the initial theory that a revolver had been used and even identified the exact model. It was discovered that the gun was a CT Python 357, a high-precision 6-shot revolver, known for its responsive trigger and exceptional accuracy, making it a top choice in its class. This model is also relatively hard to find. As police continued their investigation, they decided to interview the key witness who had initially contacted emergency services about the gruesome discovery. Her account added a strange twist to the case. She said that the discovery of Brianna and Jason's bodies was no accident. She had been led to them by a mysterious stranger. She detailed to the police that during her morning bike ride across the bridge, a man had nonchalantly informed her of the bodies of two people lying on the trail below, and warned her to be aware of her surroundings before proceeding. Prompted by the stranger's mysterious instructions, she ventured down the trail, where she found the victims and then contacted emergency services. The police were particularly intrigued by this stranger. He did not report the bodies himself, and his strangely calm demeanor made it seem as though he was warning of a minor inconvenience rather than a deadly tragedy. This strange encounter led the police to speculate that he may have been involved in the murders of the two victims. Unfortunately, the witness was unable to give a detailed description of the man, as she was more focused on the horrific scene before her than on the person who had directed her there. She could not recall any specific features, clothing, or identifying characteristics of this man. Police reviewed nearby surveillance footage, hoping to find clues. They focused on cameras in the industrial park near Ship Creek, since the trail itself does not have cameras. After reviewing footage from around the time of the emergency call, they found a man on the trail just before the incident. Unfortunately, the man was walking away from the camera, so his face could not be seen. The footage only provided a general description of him. He was wearing blue pants, possibly a hoodie or a hat, a jacket, and a backpack. The only clear detail was his height. However, the information was still too limited to draw any concrete conclusions, so police continued to search by. Police released the footage, hoping that someone might be able to identify him based on his clothing. Their primary goal was to identify the stranger and investigate further to see if he had any connection to the crime. However, the man did not come forward, and although the police received some information about his possible identity, none of it led to any concrete results, and the investigation was eventually dropped. While investigating Brianna and Jason's backgrounds, the police spoke to people they knew and their relatives to try to find a motive for the murders. They explored many possibilities, including unpaid debts to drug dealers, disputes with other homeless people over territory, or the possibility of being the unintended victims of a gang conflict. However, despite considering various theories, they found no concrete evidence to support these ideas. Ultimately, the investigation revealed that Jason and Brianna were not specifically targeted, but that they were random victims present at the scene of the shooting. This is an unpredictable danger in the community, the possibility that the killer could strike randomly again. In the early morning of July 29, 2016, a tragic shooting occurred in East Anchorage, claiming the life of Tryon Kendall Thompson, 21, affectionately known as Trey. The incident occurred less than a month after the discovery of Jason Netter and Brianna Fuzzy, which increased fear in the community. Tryon was a special young man, known for his kindness and willingness to help others. He often took in homeless people and provided them with meals at his home. That morning, Tryon was on his way to his aunt's house to feed her dog while she was away. As he approached his aunt's house on his bicycle, an unknown assailant shot and killed him. Police found Tryon's body on the street with gunshot wounds to the head and torso. As with the previous case, no shell casings were found at the scene, but a nearby surveillance camera captured the incident. The camera installed at Tryon's aunt's house captured the events leading up to the shooting. At approximately 3 a.m., a man was seen walking down the street before suddenly pulling out a handgun and shooting Tryon. In the footage, it is shown that after Tryon collapsed, the attacker calmly walked up to him, put the pistol in his pocket, took Tryon's bike and rode off into the night. The surveillance video was not the only evidence gathered. The incident was also witnessed by two young girls who stayed up late, passionately telling scary stories by the window of a nearby house. At first, they became concerned when they noticed a tall figure lurking in the street. Then their attention turned to another figure further down the street. Tryon, just before the fatal shot rang out. After momentarily averting their gaze, they looked back to witness the tragic aftermath. Trey lying motionless on the ground and the assailant making a slow escape on the bicycle past their vantage point. The girls who witnessed the incident provided police with a detailed description of the shooter. They described him as an older man with some distinctive features: wavy shoulder-length hair, heavy boots, a baseball cap, and a camouflage jacket. He was notably tall. After reviewing surveillance footage, experts estimated the shooter to be about 6 feet 2 inches tall, possibly taller. Based on the girls' accounts, a composite sketch of the suspect was created and released to the public, along with a photo of the stolen bicycle. Police warned the community to remain vigilant. Police quickly found a connection between Tryon's murder and the previous murders on Ship Creek Trail. Deepening the mystery, as Tryon, like Brianna and Jason, had no apparent enemies or known reason to be targeted, raising the disturbing possibility of random acts of killing. A thorough forensic investigation confirmed that the same weapon was used in all 3 murders, suggesting that a serial killer was present in Anchorage. As the case unfolded, public reaction to the composite sketch generated a series of leads. Tryon's mother, Minnie Primo, was determined to find her son's killer. She actively shared the sketch of the suspect and gathered information about the attacker. This led her to a crucial discovery. She saw a cyclist who matched Tryon's stolen bike on the night of his murder. The person was heading toward a local shelter, a remote area that houses temporary shelters for people without stable housing. Realizing the importance of this discovery, many immediately notified the police. A patrol unit was dispatched to the shelter, where they found the bicycle and took it in for further investigation. Nearby, hidden in a tree hollow, they also discovered a gun. After speaking with residents of the shelter, police quickly identified the owner of both the bicycle and the pistol. The suspect was then taken to the police station for questioning. However, as police continued to speak with the man, they began to doubt whether they had the right person. Further investigation revealed that the homeless man was a former New York Police Department officer. However, surveillance footage of the suspect showed him holding the pistol with one hand, while police are trained to hold their guns with both hands. This discrepancy makes the homeless man unlikely to be the perpetrator. Additionally, the pistol found in the tree was a different model than the Colt Python .357 used in the 3 previous cases. A closer look at the bicycle revealed that it bore only a slight resemblance to the one stolen from Tryon. Based on these findings, the homeless man was eliminated as a suspect, extinguishing initial hopes of a lead in the case. A month after Tryon's death, Anchorage police were alerted to another homicide in the same area. On the night of August 28, 2016, a woman walking through Moon Valley Park called 911 when she discovered the body of a young man, later identified as 34-year-old Kevin Turner. Kevin was homeless, like Brianna and Jason. Sadly, Kevin suffered from schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, and he had sought out a facility that focused on mental health care but had not found one that met his needs. And now his life was tragically cut short. Kevin was found sitting on a picnic bench in the park with his head resting on a table, holding a pair of socks. His shoes had been removed and placed next to him, suggesting he may have been shot while wearing socks. It appears he did not notice the attacker, as there was no indication that he had attempted to hide from the gunfire. Nearby, police discovered a second victim, Bryant DeHassan, 25, a local environmental activist, who was out cycling at night. Bryant's body was found not far from where Kevin had been in the park. Police discovered that shell casings had disappeared from the scene, similar to the previous 2 incidents. The bullets that killed Bryant and Kevin were fired from the same Colt Python .3576 shotgun. This led police to believe that the same person was responsible for all three attacks, bringing the total number of victims to 5. Despite this breakthrough, however, police were still unable to identify or track down the suspect. After the third attack, Anchorage police warned residents of a serial killer on the loose, advising them to be vigilant and stay away from public parks and bike paths, especially at night. The attacker targeted victims at random, without any prior planning or specifics, leaving everyone feeling threatened. As a result, the community was plunged into fear. To aid the investigation, police offered a $10,000 reward for information leading to the arrest of the killer. Despite receiving numerous tips, the investigation has not made significant progress. The situation took a major turn in November 2016 when a completely separate incident accidentally led police to a suspect. On November 12, 2016, at approximately 4:30 a.m., Officer Arn Saleo of the Anchorage Police Department was patrolling downtown. He received a call about a nearby incident. A taxi driver had reported that a passenger had run away without paying his fare nearby. Officer Arn Saleo decided to search the area on the deserted streets before dawn for fare evaders. Arn Saleo saw a man walking on the sidewalk and wanted to know if he had seen anything unusual. From inside his car, Arn Saleo asked the man to stop, but the man did not listen to him and continued walking. This was recorded on the patrol car's dashboard camera. Despite Arn Saleo's repeated orders to stop, the man refused. Arn Saleo then used the car's loudspeaker to give the order again. A moment later, the man turned around and walked toward Arn Saleo's car. Instead of speaking, the man suddenly attacked Arn Saleo, pulled a pistol from his clothes, and fired at the police. Arn Saleo got out of the car and returned fire. Nearby, Sergeant Mark Patuk intervened to help his colleague, also shooting at the attacker. Arn Saleo was hit 4 times, suffering serious injuries to his bones, liver, and intestines. Despite his serious injuries, Arn Saleo survived the attack and was rushed to the hospital for emergency treatment. He underwent a 7-hour surgery to treat his injuries. However, the perpetrator did not survive, dying from a fatal gunshot wound to the skull and was pronounced dead at the scene. It was only after the man died that police, who had been investigating a series of recent crimes in Anchorage, discovered a connection between the man and their prime suspect. They analyzed footage from the police car's dashboard camera and compared it to footage from other cameras from previous incidents. Their investigation revealed that the stranger fit the profile of the serial killer, a tall man wearing a baseball cap and camouflage jacket, who fired his gun with only one hand. Although evidence was limited, it was determined that the gunman had used a Colt Python .357, the same type of gun involved in the 5 previous deaths. Through further investigation, the gunman was eventually identified as James Dale Ritchie. James Dale Ritchie was born on November 4, 1976, in Anchorage, Alaska. During his high school years, James stood out not only for his height but also for his exceptional intelligence. He played football and basketball, showing that he had the potential to pursue a professional sports career. After graduating in 1994, James' impressive talent attracted the attention of the West Virginia University football team, leading to his recruitment. He initially attended college for 1 semester but then dropped out to pursue a different path. Upon returning to Anchorage, James' life began to decline. He became addicted to drugs and became involved in a variety of illegal activities, including burglary and drug trafficking. James' involvement in these activities led to numerous arrests and a notable conviction in 2005 for burglary and attempted kidnapping, in which he used zip ties and 2 handguns. After 2 years in custody, James returned to Anchorage, where he may have purchased his Colt Python .357 revolver. In 2013, Richie relocated to his parents' home in the quaint Virginia town of Broadway. Even his mother expressed fear of him, describing him as a potential danger. She was convinced that her son's fate was either a lifetime in prison or a violent death. Despite these ominous predictions, Richie appeared to seek a change. He started to prepare for an associate's degree at a nearby college and attended classes. James was reportedly amiable to his neighbors, began relationships, and even experienced love. Nevertheless, Richie's later choices led him to a grim series of violent offenses culminating in his death during an encounter with law enforcement. Richie seemed to be realigning his life, yet this phase was short-lived. His romantic relationship concluded in a manner far removed from what he had hoped, causing deep distress for both individuals involved. Struggling to manage his feelings, Richie made his way back to Anchorage in March 2016. He even pursued mental health support and took antidepressants for a period. Law enforcement was unable to confirm if Richie had been formally diagnosed with any psychiatric condition, but indications suggest he might have genuinely struggled with schizophrenia. Following his passing, a former housemate disclosed that James Dale Richie frequently uttered bizarre claims, like possessing the power to alter weather conditions, sincerely believing he could summon rain or bring out the sun. He also harbored beliefs about his ability to dictate life and death, choosing who would survive and who would perish. Even posthumously, James Dale Richie was identified as the primary suspect in multiple shootings. Though detectives lacked concrete evidence to conclusively link him to the crimes. The similarities in physical description and the identical firearm used in all 5 cases provided a strong basis for suspicion. The challenge now lay in compiling additional proof to provide fresh assurances to the public. In the course of searching Richie's residence, law enforcement officials found 18 shell casings concealed in his closet, precisely matching the count of rounds discharged from the revolver in all 5 incidents. Ballistic analysis confirmed that the firearm belonging to Richie was responsible for the fatalities of the victims. This proof was deemed sufficient to officially declare in April 2017 that James Dale Richie was the assailant behind the serial offenses that had cast a shadow of terror over Anchorage for months. Unfortunately, this revelation did little to console the victims' families, who wanted the perpetrator arrested, tried, and sentenced to life in prison. The reason behind Richie's murderous actions against these 5 people remains elusive and will probably never be solved. An intriguing detail surfaced that may or may not bear relevance to the case. In his youth, James had been close to the father of Trey Thompson, Bobby Thompson. This long-standing friendship persisted, and at the time of his son Trey's murder, Bobby was incarcerated for offenses involving illicit drugs and firearms. This element prompts speculation on whether Richie was aware of his target that fateful night and if the memory of his friend crossed his mind. Evidently devoid of any remorse, Richie perpetuated his criminal spree. His apprehension was fortuitous, suggesting that if not for that incidental encounter, the tally of his victims could have exceeded 5. Hello, crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Nicole Vanderheyden. Nicole met Douglas in January 2015. At the time, she had been through a marriage, 2 children, and a divorce. After they began dating, Nicole and Douglas began living together, and within a few months, Nicole discovered she was pregnant. Both Douglas and Nicole were excited about the prospect of raising children together. In May 2016, Nicole, Douglas, and their 3 children, the youngest of whom was 6 months old, lived in Green Bay, Wisconsin. On Friday night, May 20th, the couple decided to attend a concert to get some time off. They had arranged for a babysitter to look after the children while they were away at the concert. A photo was taken of Nicole happily chatting with Douglas and his friends. As the concert was coming to an end, Nicole and her friends decided to go to another bar to extend the night. Douglas said he would go to the bar after finishing a conversation with a friend. Surveillance footage showed Nicole having a good time at the bar while Douglas had not yet arrived to join her. After a while, Nicole became angry and sent him a text message, accusing him of being unfaithful. At around 12:30 a.m., she tried calling Douglas, but he did not answer. Feeling annoyed, Nicole asked a friend to call Douglas from their phone and he answered. Nicole was upset that Douglas had ignored her calls. She got up and walked towards the exit, although her friends tried to stop her, but could not stop her from leaving. Annoyed, Nicole ran out into the street, turned the corner of the building and disappeared into the dark night. When Douglas and his friends realized she was gone, they began searching for her. They drove around the nearby streets, but could not find her. They eventually returned to the bar, had a few more drinks, and then went home. At around 5:30 a.m., Douglas called the police to report that his girlfriend, Nicole Vanderheiden, was missing. He gave her a description of her appearance. That same day, a local farmer contacted the police after finding the body of a woman in tall grass near his farm in Brown County. At first, he thought it might be an animal, but upon closer inspection, he noticed her blonde hair. The woman was found naked, except for socks and a pink bracelet on her wrist. There was a lot of blood in the area, and she had severe injuries to her face. When the police examined the body, they confirmed that it matched Douglas' description, identifying the deceased as Nicole. The location where her body was found was just 3 miles from Nicole's family home. Douglas was called in for questioning. He explained that he and a friend had left a bar that night around 2:30 a.m. His friend had dropped him off at around 3 a.m. After entering the house, Dietrich went to sleep and woke up around 5:30 a.m. He realized Nicole had not returned home and immediately called the police to report her missing. Dietrich maintained his innocence and denied any involvement in Nicole's disappearance or death. He was shocked when police informed him that Nicole's body had been found at the farm. At the same time, police obtained a search warrant for Douglas' home. During the search, they found blood on the garage floor and in the back seat of their car. Additionally, a pair of Air Jordan sneakers were discovered in the garage, matching the shoe prints found at the scene where Nicole died. Blood stains were also found on the soles of the sneakers. In the early morning hours of May 21st, a patrol officer found several items belonging to Nicole along a freeway approximately 2 miles from where her body was found. These items included her purse, cell phone, and clothing, and were found near a building across the street from her home. At this location, police also discovered numerous blood stains and several locks of blonde hair, as well as a phone charger. Police collected more than 70 pieces of evidence and sent them for forensic analysis. They worked to reconstruct the events of the tragic night that led to Nicole Vanderheiden's death. Initially, police believed that a confrontation had occurred between Douglas and Nicole as she returned home that night, leading to the crime taking place outside. They believed Nicole had been killed about 120 feet from her front door. As a result, Douglas was arrested and taken into custody. However, after 18 days, forensic analysis revealed that the blood found in the garage, car, and near the neighbor's house did not belong to Nicole. In fact, it was not human blood at all. Furthermore, the stains on his sneakers were not blood. On the night of the incident, Douglas wore a fitness tracker on his wrist that recorded his movements. This data supported his statement to the police. He drove home that night, checked on his children, and then went to bed. As a result, Douglas was cleared of all suspicion and released from custody. The investigation team wanted to understand why Nicole had come so close to her home, especially since her body was discovered just 3 miles away. They reviewed surveillance footage from a bridge in Green Bay and hypothesized that if Nicole had been walking, she would have crossed that bridge. However, they found no useful clues. A key finding was that blood samples taken from Nicole's clothing, garage, car, and neighbor's yard did not match her DNA, Instead, they belonged to an unidentified man. This created a major obstacle for forensic experts, who were unable to definitively identify him. However, a breakthrough came in August, nearly 3 months after the traumatic incident. The forensic lab informed police that they had successfully isolated DNA material from one of Nicole's socks. The DNA sample was comprehensive and reliable. When they entered the DNA results into the national database, they found the name of George Stephen Birch, a man who had lived in Virginia. George moved to Green Bay, Wisconsin, on March 1, 2016, in search of a fresh start. A longtime friend gave him a place to stay and helped him find a job. The friend also loaned George a red Chevrolet Blazer, which was later involved in an accident and caught fire. A few weeks after Nicole Vanderheiden's death, police ran a background check on George in the local police database and found a report of a car accident involving him. The report led them to his address. Police then went to George's neighborhood and saw him on his porch. Police confiscated his cell phone. The team working on the Nicole case requested a copy of the data from George's phone. By analyzing cell tower records, local Wi-Fi networks, and GPS data, police determined that on the night of Nicole's disappearance, George was at a bar just a half-mile from where Nicole was staying with friends. GPS data showed that at 2:30 a.m., he left the bar and drove to Nicole's house, staying there for about an hour before going to the farmhouse where Nicole's body was eventually found. He then went to the location where her clothes were found. By 4:22 a.m., George had returned to his home. 4 months after Nicole's death, George was arrested and charged with first-degree intentional homicide. On February 19, 2018, George went to trial. His defense team attempted to blame Nicole's boyfriend, Douglas. However, prosecutors believed that Douglas had nothing to do with her death. They presented evidence from his health monitor, which showed that he had been asleep during the time Nicole was brutally attacked near the farm. On the third day of the trial, Douglas testified, revealing that he and Nicole had planned to get married and had discussed it on the night of the tragic event. He said they were enjoying the concert and had been drinking, although Nicole was not usually a heavy drinker. But she had drunk more than usual that night. When Nicole decided to go to another bar with friends first, Douglas and his friends chose to stay at the concert venue to continue partying, including drinking and drug use. Douglas admitted that he had spent some time with Nicole at the bar, and during that time he had received angry messages from her accusing him of being unfaithful. Nicole had called him several times and eventually her phone battery died. Douglas expressed his confusion and concern about Nicole's anger toward him that night, and he adamantly denied any connection to her disappearance and subsequent death. Shortly after Douglas testified in court, George's defense attorney presented a key piece of evidence: text messages that Douglas had sent to his mother just 10 days before the incident. In one message, Douglas stated, "I'm actually thinking about telling Nicole and the kids that they have to move out." He later explained that the messages were not intended to be taken seriously. Additionally, George's attorney presented testimony from Douglas's former girlfriends, who described him as a jealous and controlling person who often treated them badly. One ex-girlfriend even claimed that he had installed a tracking device on her phone to monitor her movements on the night of Nicole's disappearance. After Nicole's tragic death, she confronted Douglas, accusing him of not only being unfaithful but also cruel. Douglas continued to deny all allegations and maintained that he had never been unfaithful to Nicole, nor had he ever raised a hand against her. In court, the nanny who was at Douglas and Nicole's home the night they attended the concert testified. She recalled asking Douglas where Nicole was when he returned. Douglas replied, he didn't know. She hit her head and just wanted to walk home. On the 8th day of the trial, George Birch presented his account of the events of that night. He began by describing himself as a hard worker and a caring family man. On the evening of May 20th, He was at a bar where he met Nicole. George claimed that they had flirted and that he felt Nicole was open to his advances. He described their conversation as friendly, lasting until the bar closed at around 2:30 a.m. He then drove her home, parking near the driveway to continue the conversation for a few more minutes. George explained that they had consensual sex in his car, with Nicole participating. He said that he could not sit comfortably in the back seat because of his size, so he stood by the open back door while Nicole remained inside. After their intimate moment, he suddenly felt an attack from behind that knocked him unconscious. When he regained consciousness, he was lying on the ground and saw Douglas nearby, pointing a gun at him. There was a lot of blood around, and George said he was not sure if Nicole was still alive at that time. When Douglas arrived at the farm, he was armed and carried Nicole's body into the tall grass. He later described a sudden confrontation with Douglas. George used force to push Douglas to the ground. He then said he was able to get away from Douglas and returned to his car. George then fled the scene and threw Nicole's belongings out of the car window. The next day, George went fishing with friends, including a photo taken on May 21st. Notably, he did not report the incident to the police or tell his friends what happened that night. The prosecutor argued that George's testimony was highly suspect. Nicole would not have willingly agreed to satisfy a man she barely knew, especially by exposing her buttocks out of the car window at her own home. The prosecutor argued that George intended to have sex with Nicole in his car, but she refused. When she tried to leave the car, George became angry. He grabbed a phone charger and used it to strangle her, then stripped her down to her socks. He then dumped her body in clothes and went home, hoping to avoid being caught. The prosecutor argued that George's story was full of contradictions. After the attack, dumping of the body, and escape, George went fishing with friends the next day and seemed to be having a good time. Additionally, the prosecutor showed the court Nicole's dirty clothes. If George's testimony was correct, her clothes would have been clean, since George had said she had taken them off in his car. However, in reality, Nicole's clothes were covered in blood and dirt, indicating that she had resisted while wearing them on the ground. Throughout the trial, 2 women were present, closely watching George and listening to everything he said. These women were identified as the sister and fiancée of Joey White, who died in 1997. The suspect in White's death was George Birch, White's neighbor. Although George was acquitted and released at the time, White's fiancée and sister continued to believe that he was responsible for the death of their loved one. After 19 days of testimony and jury deliberations, the judge announced his verdict. George Birch was found guilty of attempted murder. Although the judge believed George deserved the death penalty, state law mandated a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. Douglas was relieved, as he had been worried about facing new charges in Nicole's death. Without the evidence from the fitness bracelet, he would still have faced prison time. George Birch was sentenced to life in prison, ensuring that he would never hurt anyone again. Nicole's children are now being raised by their biological fathers. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Chauhan family. Amarjit Chauhan, the owner of Chiba Freight, a thriving fruit import business near Heathrow Airport. To those around him, Amarjit appeared to be a devoted family man and a kind employer, loved by his staff, and sharing a happy life with his wife and 2 young children. Amarjit viewed his employees as a part of his family. To show his appreciation to them during the busy time of the company, he would often treat them to pizza and drinks. He also maintained a calm and approachable leadership style, which earned him great respect from everyone. Amarjit's employees were concerned about the company's future if he were to move to India, a recurring subject in conversations with his wife Nancy. She hoped that Amarjit, who was 46, would soon be able to retire, allowing them to spend more time with their children. Nancy often told her husband about her desire to return to India. As time went by, Amarjit began to consider Nancy's wish and started thinking about selling their business to move back to their hometown. The plan might have worked if Amarjit Chauhan's ownership of Chiba Freight had not run into trouble. However, someone had his eye on the company Amarjit's and was looking to take control of it without investing any money. In January 2003, Kenneth, who had just been released from prison, looked for a job at Chiba Freight. Amarjit, the company's owner, who had also had his own run-ins with the law due to tax evasion, could relate to Kenneth's struggles. Knowing how hard it could be for people to find work after being out prison, Amarjit was willing to give Kenneth a chance, which was consistent with his reputation for being understanding and easygoing. Amarjit decided to offer Kenneth a second chance by hiring him as a driver. Kenneth turned out to be a diligent worker, unafraid to tackle any task, and performed his duties excellent. Kenneth was more than just a driver normally. However, in the past, he was an expert smuggler, nicknamed Captain Cash. By the late 1990s, Kenneth had built up a reputation as a veteran criminal, running various freight companies, which served as fronts to hide his real business, smuggling illegal drugs into the UK. He had risen to prominence in London's underworld and mingled with influential figures in the criminal world. Despite his modest demeanor, Kenneth led a life of luxury, perceiving himself as a wealthy socialite and a renowned figure in the global underworld. In 1997, at the peak of his illicit activities, Kenneth met Belinda Bruin, a socialite, at an upscale London bar. He flaunted his wealth, driving a Mercedes and showering her with expensive gifts. She saw him as sophisticated and charming, albeit a bit rough around the edges, a man who impeccably showed off his luxury watches and wasn't afraid to display his wealth. Often seen carrying a briefcase full of cash, Kenneth believed this extravagant lifestyle would boost his social standing. Unbeknownst to her, Belinda Bruin drawn into Kenneth's world of crime and deception. Kenneth becomes intensely infatuated with Belinda. He calls and emails her constantly, professing his feelings, as if he were a lovesick teenager. Even though they only have a superficial acquaintance, Kenneth tells others that Belinda is his girlfriend, this thing's leaving Belinda confused. Kenneth was arrested on June 17, 1998, in possession of 25 kilograms of a white substance, which put him at risk of receiving a prison sentence of up to 18 years. However, Kenneth chose to cooperate with the authorities and his testimony helped convict 12 major criminals. As a result, his own sentence was significantly reduced. 4 years later, Kenneth being released from prison, he found himself with nothing, no friends, no money, and his assets had been seized. When faced with these hardships, he moves into a small house, with his father, determined to find the way to regain his lost wealth and status. Kenneth, looking to get back into the illicit drug trade, targeted Amarjit Chauhan's company Chiba Freight is the perfect stepping stone for his return. He carefully devised a plan to take control of the company, carrying it out so meticulously that no one suspected anything. Once inside the company, Kenneth learned from co-workers that Amarjit was considering selling Chiba Freight to move abroad. Seizing the opportunity, Kenneth approached Amarjit with a fake story, offering a deal worth $4 million to grab his attention. While Amarjit thought over the proposal, Kenneth continued with his plan, seeking to use Chiba Freight for more than just business. Meanwhile, Kenneth also set his sights on Belinda, who had moved to Devon to escape him during his time in prison. He reached out to her again with a business proposal, knowing she was struggling financially. After her husband left, she was shouldering their responsibilities alone, finding it increasingly difficult to afford her house, the mortgage, and the high costs of sending her children to a private school. When she responded, Kenneth told her about his plan to take over Chiba Freight and suggested she join the company as a director. Despite lacking experience, he offered her a salary of $54,000 for working only 2 days a week, amounting to $68,000 per year. Belinda took advantage of the opportunity and negotiated a higher salary of $72,000, nearly $9,000 more, which Kenneth agreed to without hesitation. Kenneth to visit Belinda at her rural home in Devon under the guise of discussing a job. To justify these visits, he made up reasons, such as needing her signature on a document or help with paperwork. However, Kenneth's real interest lay in the land surrounding Belinda's home, an interest that soon became clear. He began to express concerns to Belinda about the condition of the path leading to the house, suggesting various improvements. These included removing certain trees, building a wall with electric gates, and installing a drainage system. At first, it seemed Kenneth was motivated by a desire to beautify the property for Belinda's benefit. But this might not have been his true intention. In February, Amarjeeth made a critical decision regarding the future of his company. He chose to engage with buyers to discuss a possible sale. Before leaving, Amarjeeth informed his employees that he would be visiting Stonehenge, but gave no further details. Additionally, he promised to keep them personally updated on the progress of the sale company. Unfortunately, this meeting would be the last time his employees saw him, and his unexplained disappearance soon became a matter of concern. On a Monday morning, the staff of Chiba Freight gathered together, only to be met with a shocking announcement. Kenneth unexpectedly introduced Belinda as the new owner of the company, catching everyone off guard and raising many questions. The employees were left wondering what had happened to Amarjeeth, why he hadn't said goodbye, and what the future company. Then, Kenneth presented a letter that he claimed was from Amarjeeth. According to the letter, Amarjeeth had decided to sell the company due to poor health and was relocating abroad with his family. Notably, the staff confirmed that the signature on the letter belonged to Amarjeeth. The company's success and surge in orders left the team too busy to worry about what the future held. As a result, they stopped discussing their concerns and focused on their work. Belinda was given a desk and computer in the office and started studying the company's finances as instructed by Kenneth. However, she felt unwell on her second day and decided to leave for her home in Devon without waiting for Kenneth's approval. When she arrived, she was shocked to see an old, run-down Jaguar parked by the road and two men, William Hornsey and Peter Rees, who were associated with Kenneth, digging a drainage ditch on her property. This unexpected discovery made her extremely uncomfortable. Belinda confronted Kenneth as soon as he arrived at her property, expressing her frustration and anger over the unauthorized excavation work he had done. She told him she didn't need a drainage ditch, but Kenneth claimed that he did it just to surprise her and assured her everything would be sorted out by summer. However, their plans were put on hold when the Metropolitan Police started a new investigation into the situation. In 2003, Kenneth, who had previously been convicted for drug trafficking, are rebuilding his luxurious life. After Amarjeeth, the former owner of the Chiba Freight, disappeared, Kenneth took over the company, using it as a cover for his smuggling operation. For 5 years, Kenneth had secretly admired the Belinda, and now that she was involved in his operation, it seemed like all his dreams were coming true. But the foundation of his empire was about to be exposed. Onkar Varma, a journalist based in New Zealand, was eagerly awaiting a reunion with his 25-year-old sister, Nancy, who lived in London with her husband, Amarjeeth Chauhan, and their 2 young children. This visit was especially significant, as Onkar and Nancy hadn't seen each other in 9 years. Onkar would frequently talk to Nancy and their mother to discuss activities and plan his upcoming visit. However, on February 15, 2003, Onkar attempted to contact Nancy and his mother, but neither of them responded. Initially, he thought they might be on a trip, but as the days passed without any response, Onkar grew increasingly concerned. This was unusual because they had not mentioned any travel plans to him, and his visit was just 5 days away. Concerned for his family's safety, Onkar contacted the Metropolitan Police for help. When Police Scotland Yard visited the family's residence, they found it empty. Neighbors and colleagues speculated that the family might have returned to their home country, India. However, further updates from police officer Scotland Yard increased Onkar's anxiety for his sister, mother, and nephews. His concern turned into fear, prompting him to decide on traveling to the UK to personally investigate the disappearance of his family. Upon arrival in London, Onkar felt isolated in an unfamiliar city. He went to the Chauhan household in Hounslow, expecting a warm welcome. Instead, he was shocked by a sight that left him in utter disbelief. At first glance, the home looked normal, as if the family had just stepped out for a moment. But the reality was very different. Closer inspection revealed that the family had been gone for weeks. The laundry was still in the washer, children's toys and baby bottles with leftover food were scattered across the floor and kitchen counter, and food had spoiled. It looked like someone had been interrupted in the middle of washing dishes. While clothes and suitcases were neatly stored away, personal belongings were scattered throughout the three-bedroom house. The refrigerator still had food. But what devastated Onkar the most was finding his mother's cherished prayer book, a possession she always kept close and never left behind. Onkar was confused and worried about his sister's family, who had 2 young children, disappearing without a trace. It seemed unlikely that they had left their home by choice. Onkar convinced the authorities to launch an investigation. A team of experienced detectives from the Serious Crime Division took over the case. As time passed, Onkar lost hope of ever being reunited with his family, and their future plans will no longer be fulfilled. A massive search was launched to find the family of Amarjit Chauhan. The lead detective decides to question the person who last saw Amarjit on the day he disappeared. Kenneth, a former prisoner with a suspicious behavior, was the primary suspect. Kenneth tried to convince the police that Amarjit was not a trustworthy man and his financial troubles led him to run away on his own. Kenneth also told the police that Amarjit likely wanted to get rid of his business and was probably in another country by then. However, the investigators did not believe Kenneth's explanation. They used advanced forensic techniques to track the movement of Kenneth and Amarjit's cell phones on the day Amarjit disappeared. The investigation first located Amarjit's phone at his home, which then moved on to Stonehenge, where a business meeting was scheduled. It was at Stonehenge that Kenneth's phone connected with Amarjit's. And after that, both phones were tracked moving towards Devon. The detectives' only lead was that Belinda Bruin, the new head of Chiba Freight, lived in Devon, so they decided to pay her a visit. However, when the police talked about plans to search Belinda's piece of land, her partner, Kenneth, intervened. He was furious and tried to convince her not to allow the search, suggesting they meet somewhere else instead. Belinda refused to budge. Meanwhile, Kenneth's aide, William Hornsey, got in touch with the chief detective and claimed he had recently spoken with Amarjit. He said that Amarjit was apparently still in Britain. The authorities agreed to meet in Newport, Wales, near the passport agency, hoping to use this opportunity to uncover the truth behind Amarjit's disappearance. The authorities decided to cancel their plan to search Belinda's piece of land, as they needed to confirm in person that Amarjit was indeed safe to conclude the investigation. However, before the scheduled encounter at the passport agency on Monday, 3 men, Kenneth, William, and Peter, made an unexpected visit to Belinda's estate over the weekend, surprised Belinda. While there, they noticed a damaged path near the stable and decided to repair it with gravel. When a digger was later delivered to her estate, she took her children to the city, leaving the 3 men behind to repair that road. 2 days after, detectives went to the designated site to meet with Amarjit. When they arrived, they saw Hornsey and Kenneth's vehicle appear, stop briefly, and then leave as if the encounter had been cancelled. Kenneth went back to work at Chiba Freight, and the detectives decided to question Belinda again. Before this, Kenneth had warned her not to tell the police about the work he had done on her land. However, Belinda found his warning strange and decided to tell the investigators about it. She explained that some of Kenneth's associates had gone onto her farm without permission and dug a drainage trench, even though she hadn't asked for it. Belinda had unknowingly assisted the police significantly. The detectives quickly traveled to Devon, where they conducted excavations and thorough forensic tests with the help of experts. They searched through on piece of land Belinda's for 5 days, thinking they would find the remains of Amarjith and his family. However, nothing was discovered. After searching for more than 2 months, in April 2003 police realized that they had been searching in the wrong location. In the popular British holiday town of Bournemouth, Dorset, along the English Channel, a father and son, Dave and Carl, had planned the canoe trip for the evening. The sea was calm, the breeze was refreshing, and the climate ideal for a leisurely paddle. As they made their way through the water, they noticed something large floating in the distance. As they drew closer, they realized it was a badly decomposed body, severely swollen from being in the water for an extended period, making it hard to determine the person's sex. Carl quickly paddled back to shore to alert the authorities while his father, Dave, stayed with the body. Dave was left waiting alone in the darkness for nearly 3 hours, as he waited for help to arrive. This harrowing experience would forever be etched in their memories. The body was later taken to a morgue in Bournemouth, but it took almost a week to identify it. The deceased was Amarjith Chauhan, a missing entrepreneur who had suffered severe head injuries and had his mouth taped shut. The autopsy revealed that he likely died from the head trauma and suffocation. His clothes were removed for forensic examination. Meanwhile, police searched for more clues 62 meters away in Belinda's field and made a significant discovery, including a pile of charred clothes, jewelry, and strands of hair that were later confirmed to belong to Amarjith, as well as pieces of children's clothing. Initial investigations suggested that a family of 5 might be buried at the site. The once private property in Devon, owned by Belinda, was secretly used as a burial ground for the Amarjith Chauhan family. When police became suspicious, the bodies were exhumed and taken by boat to the middle of the bay in Bournemouth, where they were dumped into the sea. Until a body was found, the staff at Chiba Freight held on to the hope that their employer might return Sunday, even if he had sold the business, as they expected him to say goodbye or make a visit in the future. However, all hopes shattered when the drowned man was confirmed as Amarjith. The situation worsened as concern for the remaining family members grew. Nancy was merely 25 years old, and their children were just infants. The thought that someone could extinguish so many innocent lives was harrowing, yet all evidence pointed tragically in that direction. The excavation area was disproportionately large for the concealment of just one corpse. A smaller site would suffice for hiding a single individual. Furthermore, the simultaneous disappearance of Amarjith, along with Nancy, mother-in-law Chiranjit, and children, Ravinder Va Devinder, suggested a tragic end. The investigation becoming a high-priority case because very serious crimes. Kenneth became the main suspect, but he and his accomplice, William, had disappeared. Initial information suggested that Kenneth and William had fled to Europe, leaving their associate, Peter Rees, behind. Peter Rees, a 39 years old, feeling intense guilt over his crime, unexpectedly confessed to a stranger he had just met about the circumstances of the Amarjith family's tragic end. His confession was likely driven by a fear of being blamed entirely, as he couldn't believe his accomplice Kenneth would harm 2 innocent children. The stranger reported this information to the authorities, and Peter was arrested 12 days later. However, once in custody, Peter maintained his silence during police questioning, leaving the whereabouts and fate of the Amarjith Chauhan family a mystery. 3 weeks after the Amarjith body discovery, another body was found in the Solent, a part of the English Channel. Onkar was asked to identify the remains, which he recognized as those of his older sister, Nancy, despite the significant decomposition. The main suspects were eventually caught. Kenneth was arrested in Belgium after 2 months on the run, while William turned himself in 6 weeks later. However, even with the 3 suspects in custody, they refused to cooperate with the investigation. Despite the arrests, the case was still unsolved because 3 members of the Chohan family were missing and there were no eyewitnesses to their murders. The investigation now needed irrefutable evidence to move forward. The detectives were unaware that Amarjit had left behind a crucial piece of evidence. In April 2005, the longest criminal trial in British history began, with the prosecution aiming to prove that Kenneth, William, and Peter were responsible for the kidnapping and murder of the Chohan family. Over the course of the 10-month trial, more than 4,500 physical evidence items were examined. However, the analysis of phone communications formed the core of the prosecution's case. Amarjit had initially met with Kenneth to discuss the sale of the company, but he was kidnapped and held captive at Kenneth's home. There, he was forced to sign documents that would make it seem to his employees that he had sold the business and moved abroad. A significant piece of evidence emerged when the son of William handed over a gray suitcase to the police containing A4 sheets signed by Amarjit. Reagan initially planned to kill only Amarjit, but he realized that this would likely prompt the rest of the family to raise an alarm. As a result, he decided to target the entire family. On the day of the murder, Peter was tasked with keeping an eye on Amarjit, while Kenneth and another accomplice, William, went to the family's home in London. They stayed there for several hours, but exactly how they killed the other family members remains unclear. Amarjit was killed at Kenneth's home, which was then thoroughly renovated, including replacing all the furniture, to destroy any evidence. 8 months later, a significant breakthrough occurred when forensic scientists re-examined Amarjit's clothing. They found a folded letter in his right sock. The letter was addressed to Kenneth and dated February 12, 2003, proving that Amarjit had been at Kenneth's residence on the day he disappeared. Unbeknownst to his killers, Amarjit had intentionally left behind this clue. This crucial piece of evidence ultimately helped the police in their investigation. A lengthy 9-month trial ended with the jury's unanimous verdict. Peter Rees was sentenced to 23 years in prison for murdering Amarjit Chohan. Meanwhile, Kenneth Reagan and William Hornsey each received 5 consecutive life sentences for the murders Nancy, Charanjit Kaur, Ravinder Va Devinder, ensuring they would spend the rest of their lives behind bars. Later, the remains of Charanjit Kaur, Amarjit's mother-in-law, were found off the coast of the Isle of Wight. Unfortunately, the bodies of the 2 young children, 18 months old Devinder and 2 months old Ravinder, were never recovered. It's often difficult to comprehend how someone could commit such atrocities against children. Typically, individuals who carry out these acts have psychological issues or are unaware of the severity of their actions. However, this was not the case with Kenneth, he to be mentally sound. For him, the brutal acts he committed were simply a means to achieve his goals, and he showed no hesitation in taking innocent lives in pursuit of his own ambitions. Was profoundly affected by incident. He now lives in New Zealand, permanently separated from his nephews. A family video, recorded just 2 days before they disappeared, was found in their empty home. This heartbreaking video is the last remaining testament to a once joyful family torn apart by tragedy. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Alan Ruby. Oklahoma is known for its diverse landscape of forests and mountains, its cowboy heritage, the rich history of Native Americans, and its stunning natural scenery. Southwest of Oklahoma lies the town of Duncan, where the Ruby family called home. John and Joy Tinker Ruby were a prime example of a happy couple, enjoying a fulfilling life in their hometown. The Ruby family owned and operated a local newspaper press agency, the Duncan Banner, for 3 generations, then selling it in 1997. Years later, in 2013, they acquired another local publication, the Kiamichi County Chronicle. With their business thriving, the Ruby led a prosperous and respected life, held in high esteem by everyone. John and Joy had 2 children, Catherine and Alan. Catherine was born on August 21, 1997, and from an early age, she showed of being intelligent, have artistic talent, and hardworking. By the time she was 17, she was a standout on her high school volleyball team, known for her bright smile. Her older brother, Alan, who was born on May 8, 1995, was 18 at the time and had just started taking political science courses at the University of Oklahoma. Alan was an outgoing and sociable person who greatly differed from his reserved younger sister. Unlike him, Catherine was quiet and preferred to keep to herself. Alan, on the other hand, loved being the focal point of attention, and his outgoing personality drew people to him. He enjoyed having fun and living life to the fullest. Wealth was very important to Alan, and he loved to spend money on expensive things. He enjoyed shopping and buying luxurious items. During his free time, he would often go on vacation using his parents' money. Like many rich people, Alan liked to show off his wealth on social media by sharing stories and photos of his luxury brands, expensive cars, and high-end fashion items. Even though he lives lavishly beyond his means, but Alan reveled in the fact that others thought he was wealthy and influential. Interestingly, despite his luxurious lifestyle, he preferred simple, affordable food from McDonald's to expensive restaurants. He loved McDonald's and would often try different items on the menu, especially when traveling to new countries. He would share his experiences with his followers, but not many people were interested. He considered himself a public figure. A quick look at his posts and pictures revealed is to see that he is a very narcissistic person. Alan's reckless spending habits were putting a significant strain on his family's finances. His parents were patient with him at first, but as time went on, they have lost tolerance for him. The family's publishing business was already struggling due to the shift towards digital media, and Alan's extravagant spending made things worse. As the demand for print media decreased, the family's resources dwindled rapidly, leaving John and Joy to deal with the consequences of Alan's actions. At first, Alan's parents took on the financial strain themselves by cutting back on their own expenses. However, they soon realized this was not enough and shifted their focus to reducing their children's spending, Catherine and Alan. They discovered their son's spending was out of control. As a result, they made the difficult decision to stop supporting Alan financially. By the time they made this decision, Alan's spending had become a serious problem. His love of shopping had turned into an addiction. He was unable to go a day without buying something new and expensive. Due to no more financial support from family, Alan became desperate and started taking advantage of the people around him. Sadly, he even targeted his own grandmother, tricking her into giving him her credit card information so he could fund his lavish lifestyle. The first thing Alan did after getting his grandmother's credit card details was to take a trip to Paris, a city he loved, where he wasted time in spending her money and showing off his expensive purchases on social media. However, when Alan eventually tired of his spending spree in France, he came back home, but instead of a warm welcome from his family, he was met by the police. Alan's father was at his wits' end with his son's behavior. He had forgiven Alan's antics in the past, but things had gone too far. The final straw came when Alan stole over $5,000 from his grandmother, leading to his arrest. Despite the severity of his actions, Alan received a relatively lenient sentence. Instead of going to jail, he was put on probation in order to pay back the money he had stolen. He also had to attend counseling sessions for substance abuse and alcohol use. Alan was given a second chance in a deferred sentencing program, with a court date set for November 2014. However, this did not help him change more positively. Instead of reforming, Alan's mindset shifted to blaming others. He became increasingly resentful towards his parents, holding them accountable for taking away his financial freedom and sumptuous lifestyle. Alan's life was not just affected by his family problems. He also struggled with financial difficulties. In order to continue his lavish lifestyle, Alan turned to loan sharks for help. After his expensive trip to Europe and losing his family's financial support, he found himself heavily in debt to loan sharks. He had no way to pay back the large sum of money he owed, which was getting bigger by the day. As the interest on the debt kept growing, his situation became even more serious. Alan's life of ease and luxury was now falling apart. Faced with these financial difficulties, he felt like he had to do something. He was desperate to keep living extravagant lifestyle and avoid the consequences caused by him, which led him to make poor decisions. Alan came up with a plan to get a large sum of money to solve his financial problems. He thought he could do this by taking out life insurance policies on his family members and then waiting for them to die. However, there was a major obstacle. His parents were young, healthy, and not likely to die anytime soon. Nevertheless, Alan was desperate to get his hands on his inheritance and was willing to consider harming his parents, and possibly his younger sister, to achieve this. He believed his family had treated him unfairly and thought that by eliminating them, he can solve his problems and can spend freely without worry. On Thursday in October 2014, John left home for a brief period to run some errands. This was exactly the opportunity his son Alan had been waiting for. While his father was away, Alan secretly took the family car keys, retrieved his father's handgun from the vehicle, and brought it back into the house. As he re-entered the house, he spotted his first target, his mother, Joy, who was sitting at the dining table, completely unaware of the danger approaching her from behind. In a split second, Alan pulled the trigger, ending her life instantly. After being shot the first time, Joy did not die and fell to the ground. This led Alan to shoot a second time. Meanwhile, Alan's 17-year-old sister, Catherine, was outside working on her car. When she heard the noise from the shots, she quickly ran inside to see what was happening. As she turned a corner, she was met by her brother holding a gun and pointing it at her. Before she could understand what was happening, Alan shot her with his third bullet, and she immediately fell to the ground lifeless. For over an hour, Alan sat next to the lifeless bodies of his younger mother and sister, waiting for his father to arrive home. When the father arrived, he was met with disloyalty from his son, which led to a severe and deadly injury. Witnessing his father collapse, Alan shot him one more time to make sure he was dead. By killing his family members, who controlled his spending, Alan became financially independent. Now he can freely spend money as he pleases without being stopped by his parents. After murdering his parents and younger sister, Alan destroyed the household security footage and took the murder weapon, leaving behind the remains of a once loving family. Concerns grew among John's co-workers when he missed work on Friday. Notably, he had been scheduled to cover the school football game, an event he always attended. When his co-workers tried calling his home, no one answered. Their worries intensified when neither John nor his wife showed up to the newspaper office after the weekend, without any prior notice. On Monday, October 13th, at approximately 9 a.m., the Duncan City Police Department received a distress call from a housekeeper who worked for the John family. She reported in panic that she had seen a horrifying scene in John's house. Upon entering the house, she found the lifeless bodies of John, 50, his wife Joy, 48, and their 17-year-old daughter Catherine, who all appeared to have been killed. The housekeeper was concerned for the safety of the John's eldest child, Alan, who was nowhere to be found, leading her to fear that he may have been abducted after his family was killed. After eliminating his family and clearing the way for his inheritance, Alan went to Dallas, Texas, with a friend to attend a football game and create an alibi. They stayed at a luxurious hotel and Alan started posting pictures on social media as soon as they arrived. This was a deliberate move by Alan to avoid raising suspicion about the tragic incident that had befallen his family. Despite a recent family tragedy, Alan went on a weekend trip with friends and made it seem like he was carefree. Over the weekend, he posted many photos on social media, hiding the dark reality of his younger sister and parents' deaths in their home, surrounded by dried blood. His friends noticed that he was in high spirits the entire time, laughing and enjoying himself as if he had not committed a terrible crime. He appeared to be reveling in his newfound freedom, seemingly unaware that he was on probation for past theft charges, specifically stealing money from his grandmother. Furthermore, his trip to Dallas from Oklahoma was itself a probation violation, rendering his trip to Dallas to create an alibi invalid. Due to the time gap between his hotel check-in and the tragic incidents at his family's residence. While the police were thoroughly searching the Johns' home for clues, Alan was reported as missing. However, an important part of the security camera was missing, the backup disc that usually stored video recordings, making it harder for detectives to figure out what had happened. After a short 2 days, the police finally found Alan. They had been looking for him because he broke his probation terms by traveling across state lines. As the investigation continued, police also began to look into whether Alan might have been involved in some kind of fraudulent activities. Investigation revealed that Alan had secretly obtained a credit card in his grandmother's name and racked up over $177,000 in charges, in addition to a $5,000 expense for a European vacation he took 2 years earlier. Alan had previously shown aggressive behavior towards his mother during a heated financial argument. However, his mother, Joy, chose to forgive him. Law enforcement officials were shocked by the extent of Alan's deception to maintain his lavish lifestyle. Little did they know, the situation was about to take a turn for the worse, especially now that Alan was in custody and fully aware of his family's situation. The investigators saw this juncture as crucial, as Alan's response could reveal his guilt. The police carefully observed his reaction, which was overly dramatic, with loud crying and excessive displays of sadness. However, they believed his distress was not due to the loss of his family, but rather from the loss of financial resources and social status. The detectives quickly became suspicious of Alan's involvement in his family members' tragic deaths, seeing through his fake tears. His reactions only strengthened their suspicions that he was responsible. His emotional expression was like he realized that his reckless behavior was about to pay the price. He eventually admitted to premeditating the murder of his parents. Alan had attempted to cover his tracks carefully to avoid capture, but his plan to mislead law enforcement ultimately failed. Alan confessed his entire plan to the police. His main goal was to gain inherit of his family's wealth. He was deeply in debt to loan sharks, owing $3,000, and said that the severe threats from these creditors led him to desperation. Alan wanted the police to feel sorry for him, portraying himself as a victim. When questioned about the gun, Alan stated that he had thrown it into a nearby lake. Despite extensive searches by divers, the gun was never found in the lake. During the investigation, authorities found a storage unit rented under Alan's grandma's name. Inside, they found the missing hard drive from his home security system and the gun, providing strong evidence against him. The unit also contained blue gloves with Alan's DNA. This evidence, combined with Alan's confession, solidified the case against him. As Alan was being held without bail, the prosecution felt confident in their case. Prosecutors viewed Alan as a danger to society because of the serious nature of the crimes he committed against his own family, leading them to plan a severe trial against him. Alan negotiated a plea deal to avoid the death penalty by pleading guilty to the murder of his family in exchange for 3 consecutive life sentences, which was accepted by the remaining family members. The news that Alan was behind the crime shocked everyone who knew the family John, a kind and respected family. The town was left in shock and deeply disturbed by the horrific crimes Alan committed. Many people, especially Alan's friends, were in utter disbelief, as they no understand how his financial difficulties could have pushed him to commit such a heinous crime against his own family. Alan's life has taken a drastic turn for the worse, leaving him alone and disconnected from the world. Confined to a cell, he has lost touch with everyone he once knew. With no friends or loved ones left to turn to, he feels completely and utterly abandoned. Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Bonnie Craig. Bonnie Craig was born in Calgary, Canada, on March 30, 1976. Her biological father played a small role in her upbringing, as Bonnie and her older brother Jason were lovingly raised by their stepfather, Gary Campbell. Gary treated Bonnie and Jason as his own children. When Bonnie was 5 years old, Gary and her mother Karen had a son named Adam. 2 years later, a younger sister named Samantha was born, and she quickly became Bonnie's close companion. Bonnie loved to dress Samantha in fairy tale costumes and teach her everything Bonnie had learned. Gary, the head of the family, worked in the oil industry, which required him to move frequently to different locations. As a result, Bonnie was used to changing schools, having attended 6 elementary schools and 2 high schools, which taught her to adapt to new environments and make friends easily. During her childhood, Bonnie lived in a variety of climates. From sunny California with its outdoor pool to snowy Anchorage, West Texas, and finally back to the beautiful landscapes of Alaska. However, Karen and Gary's sudden divorce marked a significant change for the children. Samantha and Adam began alternating between their parents' homes. Bonnie focused on her studies and various extracurricular activities, including swimming, diving, horseback riding, writing poetry, and playing the violin and viola in the school orchestra. However, life continued to present her with unforeseen challenges. While she was trying to come to terms with her parents' divorce, tragedy struck when her best friend died in a drunk driving accident, a tragedy that profoundly changed Bonnie's outlook on life. She pledged to abstain from drinking and driving, and she was so concerned about the risks of driving that she decided not to get a driver's license for fear of getting into an accident. Instead, she chose to walk or take public transportation. To raise awareness about the dangers of drunk driving. After graduating from high school, Bonnie moved to Anchorage to study psychology at the University of Alaska. At the same time, her boyfriend, Cameron Miyazaki, was studying architecture at the University of California at Berkeley. Despite the physical distance, they kept in touch by phone and exchanged emails regularly. Bonnie's home life became crowded, as her mother began a new relationship with Jim Foster, who brought her 3 children with him. In search of more independence, Bonnie decided to move in with her stepfather. The move was strategic, as it put her only a 15-minute drive from college. Keeping her vow, she took public transportation to class 3 times a week, enjoying brisk walks to the bus stop under the clear blue Alaskan sky. She also balanced her studies with a part-time job at Sam's Club. Her life was filled with purpose, ideals, and passion. On the morning of September 28, 1994, Bonnie left her stepfather's house and headed to the bus stop to attend college classes. That day, a student at the University of Anchorage was taking scenic photos on a hiking trail in Chugach State Park, about 15 miles from Bonnie's house. The park was especially beautiful at this time of year, due to Alaska's mild temperatures, long daylight hours, and beautiful scenery. As the student adjusted her camera lens, she noticed something unusual in the water near the cliff's edge, a striking blue object. Upon closer inspection, she discovered a heartbreaking sight, a woman floating face down in shallow water. She immediately called the police to report the incident. The McHugh Creek section is difficult to access except from the cliff top or along the stream for miles, suggesting a tragic accident. Initially, police believed the victim may have slipped and fallen from the cliff top, resulting in her death. This accidental theory was the first conclusion investigators reached. It is believed that the victim, attracted by the peaceful atmosphere of the park, may have lost her balance and fallen tragically. The body was then transferred to the medical examiner's office, where an autopsy was performed to determine the cause of injuries and assist in identifying the victim. The autopsy revealed that the young woman died from drowning and severe head trauma, likely caused by a fall from the cliff. A unique class ring, often worn by graduating students, helped police identify the victim as Bonnie Craig. To confirm their findings, police contacted Bonnie's family. Karen, Bonnie's mother, is on a short trip to a coastal town to attend a relative's wedding with her husband, Jim, who spent his childhood there. The trip is significant because Karen will meet Jim's parents for the first time. Karen is having a wonderful time with her future in-laws, laughing and sharing stories. But she has no idea that tragedy has struck her beloved daughter, Bonnie. A knock on the cruise ship's door at 3 a.m. shatters the peaceful atmosphere. When faced with the heartbreaking news, Karen initially refuses to believe it, thinking it's a cruel joke. It's unthinkable that her responsible daughter would be alone in the park instead of attending college classes. The news of Bonnie's death from the police has left Karen devastated. Karen has spent the past 3 years working undercover for the Anchorage Police Department. After graduating from the police academy, she specialized in drug trafficking cases. Her colleagues deeply respected her problem-solving skills, which she had developed over years of dedication to her job. However, Karen's dedication extended beyond her work to her family. Her undercover work often required a difficult balance between her two roles. Karen instinctively questioned the initial ruling that Bonnie's death was an accident, and her priority was to turn the investigation over to her own department. Believing that there was more to her daughter's tragic death, she asked the police for detailed information about the circumstances surrounding the incident, including whether Bonnie had shown any signs of sexual violence. However, the police noted that Bonnie had been found fully clothed. Karen knew that a more thorough investigation was needed. Her daughter, Bonnie, was responsible and trustworthy, always kept her promises, and she didn't even have a driver's license, so it was difficult to understand why she was alone and miles away from home during school hours. What further confused Karen was that Bonnie's personal belongings were not at the scene, which made her suspect that the police force might be inclined to rush to classify the incident as an unfortunate accident. Karen was determined to continue her search for the truth. Karen returned to Alaska on the earliest flight possible to formally identify the body, holding out hope that the deceased might not be her daughter, Bonnie. Entering the morgue, she hesitantly approached the ambulance where the body was covered with a white sheet. When she pulled the sheet away and saw the face, her worst fears came true. It was indeed her daughter, Bonnie, resting in eternal peace. Karen's instincts, as a grieving mother and a law enforcement officer, told her that her daughter's death was more than just an accident. As she held her daughter's hand, she saw bruises and swelling on her knuckles, which she assumed were defensive wounds. Karen wanted the police to record this evidence, believing it could be crucial in finding clues before her daughter was buried. The police were skeptical, thinking the injuries could have been caused by a fall. Despite the police's skepticism, Karen decided to take a different approach in her quest for justice. Karen reached out to her media contacts. The shocking news of a young college student's death in a creek quickly garnered widespread attention from the local media. Karen attempted to contact her superiors, hoping for assistance as precious time was running out, but was told the matter was beyond their scope. The next day, Karen, Jim, Gary, Jason, Adam, and Samantha gathered at the funeral home to say their final goodbyes to Bonnie. It was difficult for her siblings to see her lying motionless, knowing how full of life she had once been. As they prepared for the funeral, they had to choose a casket. Karen, wanting to keep any potential evidence safe, decided on a stone crypt, thinking that it might need to be reopened in the future if new information came to light. Although she tried to seek help and attention from the media, her efforts seemed to complicate things rather than help uncover the truth. Karen was summoned to the police station and asked not to publicly call the incident a crime so as not to affect the ongoing investigation. The police were carefully reviewing all possible leads and were considering Gary Campbell, Bonnie's stepfather, as a potential suspect. They suspect him because his alibi doesn't quite add up and there are reports of conflict between him and Bonnie. This information leaves Karen stunned, as she finds it hard to believe that Gary, who has always been Bonnie's loving father, could be involved in such a terrible thing. The situation worsens when Karen goes to Gary's house to collect her daughter's belongings, but finds Bonnie's room locked. An argument breaks out when Gary accuses Karen of stealing a photo of Bonnie that she took without his permission. He insists on keeping the memories of the girl he cherishes. Bonnie's death has a profound effect on her younger sister Samantha, who was only 12 when the tragedy occurred. Samantha begins to struggle in school and finds it difficult to concentrate at home. She often shares everything with Bonnie and feels completely lost without her guidance. The confusion that arose from her sister's death even caused her to doubt her own trust in her father, leaving her uncertain about what was right. One evening, as her father, Gary, was tucking her in for bed, fear filled her eyes as she asked if he was responsible for Bonnie's death. Gary was surprised and hurt by her question. He regained his composure and gently reassured Samantha that he would never hurt her sister. His comforting words helped her to ease her fears and trust him again. After Bonnie's death, the police spoke to Adam and Samantha, both of whom confirmed that their father, Gary, had been home the day Bonnie died, only leaving for work after Bonnie had left the house. His alibi was confirmed by co-workers and supervisors, clearing any doubts about him. An autopsy revealed that Bonnie had died several hours before her body was found. The cause of death was determined to be drowning, and she also suffered severe head injuries that may have been caused by falling from a cliff or being struck by a heavy object. The police began a thorough investigation into Bonnie's death, which was initially ruled an accident at the park. A police officer carefully searched the area near the cliff and found a leaf with a drop of Bonnie's blood a few feet from the edge of the cliff. This prompted an investigation into the presence of blood. If her injuries were caused by a fall, the discovery led the police to consider that Bonnie's fall may not have been an accident, but rather the result of someone else's actions. The police were aware that solving this case would be difficult and would require them to proceed with caution. Therefore, they chose not to notify the relevant parties at this time. Family members suspected that a crime had occurred and the police deliberately withheld all information about the case to avoid alerting potential perpetrators. They could not escape the feeling that the killer could be someone close to Bonnie. This made Karen's sudden media release a hindrance to the investigation. Bonnie Craig's funeral was filled with loved ones, including friends, family, and acquaintances, as well as her boyfriend, who traveled from California to say goodbye. He was deeply saddened, as he could never have imagined such a tragic ending to their story. Even Bonnie's biological father, Gordon Craig, who had not played an active role in her life, attended the funeral to pay his respects and say goodbye to her. The funeral took place at a church that Bonnie occasionally visited. It was a moment for everyone who knew Bonnie to pay their last respects, share fond memories of her, and support each other during this difficult time. A week after Bonnie's death, Karen decided to investigate her daughter's case herself, since the police had not provided any updates. Karen carefully traced Bonnie's pre-dawn route from Gary's house to try to understand what might have been going through her daughter's mind that morning. She wanted to put herself in Bonnie's shoes and imagine what details might have caught her attention. As Karen walked along the path her daughter had walked many times that week, she began to realize how dangerous it was. The path was surrounded by tall trees that seemed to loom in the shadows, hiding potential dangers. Karen wondered why Bonnie didn't ask her stepfather to drive her to the bus stop, and why she never mentioned the dangerous path she had walked every day. She later learned that Bonnie felt the same way, not wanting to worry anyone and wanting to be independent. Bonnie was prepared and carried pepper spray, believing that she could protect herself if necessary. Karen had also taught Bonnie from a young age never to hitchhike with strangers, believing that her daughter would only hitchhike with someone she knew and trusted. When the walk yielded no clues, Karen drove around the area, looking for any of Bonnie's belongings that might provide clues to the investigation. Unfortunately, she found nothing. In January 1995, Karen contacted the sergeant in charge of Bonnie's case directly to ask if her daughter had been sexually assaulted. The sergeant was forced to tell her the truth. Karen was allowed to see the results of Bonnie's autopsy, on the condition that they remain strictly confidential. The autopsy revealed that Bonnie's body was fully clothed, but she had injuries to her genitals and male DNA was recovered from a swab. This information must be kept confidential because the source of the DNA is still unknown. During the investigation, all the men associated with Bonnie were questioned and their DNA samples were collected. However, no matches were found at that time. Although several witnesses saw Bonnie walking to the bus stop that morning, none of them saw her actually get on the bus. The question of how Bonnie ended up in Chugach Park, more than 10 miles from her home, remains unanswered. Investigators speculate that she may have been attacked while walking alone in the dark. A few months after Bonnie's death, Jim's family invited Jim and Karen on a week-long cruise, hoping that a change of scenery would help them heal. Karen was hesitant at first, as the cruise reminded her of her daughter's tragic death. However, she realized that the trip could be a chance to temporarily escape her grief. For the past year, Karen had been consumed by grief, the investigation, and waiting for news of her daughter. She saw the trip as a chance to temporarily escape her worries. Karen, Jim, Jim's brother Ken, and Ken's wife spent the week enjoying the sights and sounds of the ocean. When they returned to the dock, they received word from the Coast Guard that their family had attempted to contact them about an emergency. Karen immediately became concerned that it might be about one of her children. However, this time the bad news was about Jim and Ken's father, who had suddenly died of a heart attack. The news was especially shocking because the family had just celebrated their father's 63rd birthday, when he had seemed healthy and happy. Unfortunately, this was the second time the family had received heartbreaking news after returning from a boat trip. Karen's remaining children had a hard time coping with the loss of their sister Bonnie and the impact of their mother's relentless pursuit of justice. As the investigation into Bonnie's death became the focus, the children often felt neglected and deprived of the care they needed. Karen struggled with the moral dilemma of balancing her love for her children with her commitment to seeking justice for Bonnie's death, despite the possibility that the case would never be solved. Over time, Karen's children grew up and started families of their own, bringing her immense joy as a grandmother. Amidst these life changes, her youngest son Adam underwent a cornea transplant to improve his increasingly poor eyesight, which unfortunately resulted in blindness in one eye. Karen's personal life went through many changes. She married Jim, but unfortunately their marriage ended in divorce after 3 years. The family faced more difficult times, including the loss of Karen's brother and mother, who battled cancer. Throughout the ups and downs, the sadness and grief of losing Bonnie continued to have a lasting impact on Karen's life. The family experienced a great deal of emotional pain, including sleepless nights, anxiety, anger, and deep depression. On January 5, 2007, 12 years after Bonnie's death, Karen set off on a round-the-world trip with a friend. While staying on an island in the Philippines, Karen received an unexpected email from an unknown sender with the subject line, "Bonnie." The sudden message made her heart pound, as the case, which had been unsolved for years, had recently gained new momentum. A new team of investigators, using an advanced database, retested the DNA evidence found on Bonnie. Their efforts led to a breakthrough. They matched the DNA to a man serving a sentence in New Hampshire for a series of armed robberies. Kenneth Dion was born in 1969. He was 25 years old when Bonnie died. He only became a suspect in the case after his DNA was added to the system in late 2006. With a martial arts background and a track record of competition, Kenneth served in the United States Army. However, his time in the U.S. Army was cut short due to his drug use. Kenneth had a particular habit of carrying unusual items in his car, including a three-pronged stick and nunchucks. Kenneth Dion had only recently been released from prison after a brief period of freedom in May 2007. Kenneth was charged with assault and murder in connection with Bonnie's death. According to the indictment, Kenneth attacked Bonnie as she walked to the bus stop, using weapons and martial arts to sexually assault her. And then, to conceal evidence of his crimes, he dumped her body off a cliff in the park. As more information became available about Kenneth, it was discovered that he had a lengthy criminal record, with 18 convictions, including 10 misdemeanors and 8 felonies. Had Kenneth's DNA been in the database sooner, the case might have been solved more quickly. Kenneth Dion was sentenced to 124 years in prison on October 31, 2011, 17 years after the incident. He received 99 years for murder and 25 years for assault. He is eligible for parole at age 80.